Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please welcome to the stage Oliver Jeffers, visual artist, author, and climate activist.
Oh, hello. So, my name is Oliver, and I am an artist, but you could probably tell already, because I'm wearing a hat. I also speak differently, and that's because of an accent, which I don't have. You all have an American accent from what I can hear. But if you're wondering where there is no accent, it's in Belfast in Northern Ireland. So we're pretty good at art there, and telling stories. And I've been telling lots of stories and lots of books for a long time. For 20 years, that's been my job. And people ask me a lot, where do I get my ideas for these books from? Maybe you've heard of some of them. And I tell people that they're all true stories, which they're not. I make them up. So I lie professionally to children. And I've been getting away with this for 2 decades. But for a long time, I've thought that these books were, or so I thought, simple distractions mostly enjoyed by children. But I've also, as much as I love making books, I've been a fine artist, and I've had a foot in the fine art world for the same amount of time, for 2 decades. And the art that I make is about trying to understand how the world around me works. You know, like science does, but with less accuracy or peer review. But my wife is an engineer, and when we met 20 years ago, she asked me, how do you give art a grade? I was like, I've been trying to answer that ever since. I don't really know. I think it's something to do with how much bullshit you have in your back pocket to back it up. But I've always believed in the power of art. And I've managed to convince a bunch of scientists and engineers that art is very important. In fact, maybe more important than science, because I've simply pointed out that science is how we do things, but art is why we do them. Anyway, art making, storytelling, 2 very different endeavors to me, or so I thought, until in 2015 these things collided when we had our first kid. We had a son who was born in New York, and as I walked around with him in the first few months of his life, I started explaining everything that he was seeing, as you do as a new parent. It's kind of wild, actually. They never make you take a test. You can just leave the hospital with a kid. But I was explaining everything I was seeing, and I thought it was hilarious because he didn't understand a word I was saying. He didn't speak any English. And I was trying to, explain everything. And it turned into alarm when I realized that he knew nothing about the way this world works. Absolutely zero. He didn't know how humanity governed itself. And like all fresh arrivals, he didn't know what it was to be a functioning member of society. He didn't know the difference between art and science, or that art was more important. So I realized that he would need to be taught everything without prejudice. And the magnitude that suddenly came with that. So another way of looking at this is that we all arrive on Earth as untold stories. Just no context, pure potential. We get to make it all up. And as I spoke to him of these things that he was seeing around him in those first few weeks of being a human, I began writing him a letter about just the simple beauty of what it is to be alive in the world, here in time and now in the universe. And partly to protect him what felt like an angrier and scarier world than usual, because maybe it was just me with the perspective of being a fresh parent, but I was noticing that at the time of his birth, the world really did seem to be an angrier, scarier place than usual. That there was a lot of angry people, there was a lot of blame and division and shouting, and the consensus was that we were sliding backwards somehow. So what began as a letter to him about the simple joys of being a person turned into a book called Here We Are, Notes for Living on Planet Earth, because I thought maybe other people would benefit from some of these simple truths I was remembering when I considered the state of the world from the perspective of joy rather than fear. And the more I considered the state of the world this way, the more I realized that our collective future maybe isn't in as bad a shape as we keep saying that it is. We might not be headed towards this dysfunctional dystopia that we're always hearing about, and maybe it's less that the world is actually unraveling, and more that we're now, for the first time in human history, just aware of everything that's happening everywhere, instantaneously, simultaneously, and it's overwhelming. All these things have always been happening. There have always been these problems. They've just always been played out to the little areas where they were. So we have come a long way, so much so that it's easy to forget just the progress we've made and take any of the major issues of today, like life expectancy or poverty or climate awareness, health, equality, and literacy, and compare them as a whole to where we were even 50 years ago in the mid-1970s. They're all quantifiably better across the board, and that we feel so angry about many of these things, I think, is actually a step in the right direction than the indifference that we felt half a century ago. And if we go back even further than that, to about a century ago, children's books didn't exist. Why? Because kids didn't live predictably long enough to warrant having their own books. And we also forget, in our constant complaining about how shitty this miracle of life is, that the first person who suggested invisible little things that float through the air make us sick was locked in a mental asylum only 150 years ago. So we have come a long way. But there is still much to be worried about, and it is easy to feel that civilization is headed in the wrong direction, but the idea that we're all doomed and that the planet is broken doesn't sit well with me, because we're better than that. One of the strongest tools that we have at our disposal as artists is the ability to shift perspectives. A central aspect of this book, Here We Are, is the Earth's place in the cosmos. And in researching this, I came across a phenomenon known as the overview effect. And that is what happens to the human mind when it gets far enough away from the surface of our planet to see the whole thing as one object. And it completely changes how people perceive what we are up to on Earth from that distance. Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, once famously said after coming back, it makes you want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck, drag him 250,000 miles away and say, look at that. So I thought this perspective shift was reserved exclusively for astronauts, but it turns out that might not be so, because having grown up in Northern Ireland, which is actually there, and has had a politically interesting history, and in trying to explain the violent nuance of our turbulent identity crisis to well-educated Americans in New York City there when we moved 17 years ago, most of them did not and still do not appreciate, really, that the island from whence I came is two separate countries, sort of. The top bit belongs to the island next door. And speaking from this distance across an ocean, the fighting back where I grew up just suddenly seems so pathetic. And what a tragic waste of life and energy. It was poignant. And I recognized the way that I was speaking about Northern Ireland from across an ocean was the same way that astronauts spoke about Earth from the distance of the moon. So the summer after my son was born, there was a lot of violence that had flared up again in Northern Ireland. And watching it from New York, I could see in the news footage that it was just like when I was a kid, that it was kids who were hijacking, burning buses and riding with each other and the police. And I wondered what these teenagers really knew of the 800-year-old conflict that had preceded it. And the reality is, probably not much. They'd just been told a story by their parents that was validated by their peers. They had been told who to hate, and so they hated. And this is not the story that I want to tell my son of where he was from and where his family was from. And maybe my biggest epiphany as a human is that the most powerful thing we can do as civilized, conscious beings is to change the story. We can always, always change the story. A very potent thought when you realize that almost everything we know about ourselves comes from a story. We are no more than the stories we are told, the stories told about us, and the stories we tell. I said that just there now. And the most important story of all in there is the one that we tell ourselves, because this is the story of the sort of the person that we are and can be. And it gives us a sense of belonging and purpose, and that is where we can shift perspectives, the story that we tell ourselves. Everything can change depending on where we see it from or how we choose to see it. So on Apollo 8, when they went up in 1968 to look for a landing site for the Apollo 11 mission, they were the first people to see Earth from that distance and take that photograph that became known as the Earthrise photograph. But what's lesser known is that those three very intelligent astronauts, when they saw this giant landmass, they couldn't work out what part of Earth they were looking at. And it took them longer than they would care to admit that what they could see was the entire bottom half of Africa. They didn't recognize it because it was sideways. From space, it's obvious that there's no up, there's no down. We are a ball. North and south is just a story we told ourselves to give sense to chaos. And I made this map the wrong way around, but labeled everything the right way up because it's arbitrary for south to be at the bottom. And in pointing this out, something very familiar can suddenly seem really foreign when you look at it from another perspective. And even today, most of humanity's conflicts come from the ideas of national identities and maps and immigration and man-made problems that have nothing at all to do with the cosmological reality that we're floating through space on a ball. And wherever we go, we all go together. So given this, it's tragic to think of the waste of human energy, these big brains of ours that are spent on border battles, on imaginary lines, on who belongs where, given the magnitude of the threat of our home getting dangerously close to no longer being able to sustain life as we know it. And as we could clearly see during COVID, it's not so much border disputes or religious wars or occupations or who has what and who does not, or, as I heard recently, the haves and the have-yots, that will be the real threat to humanity. It's more likely going to be germs, or probably the weather, that will make life for all no longer possible. And neither of these things needs a passport. This is why I think disunity is our greatest obstacle that we have to overcome. As different as we all culturally are, we're surprisingly similar as individuals. I've been all over the world on many book tours. I've been to almost all 50 states. I've met many people from all backgrounds, political leanings, belief systems, and I very much believe the vast majority of people on Earth are good people when it comes down to it. The problem just starts to happen when we think in groups about groups. I've never met a single human being who wants to be an asshole. I mean, I've met plenty of people who are, but never met anybody who wanted to be one. And I think, that's just not how they wanted to be seen. And I think my suspicion is that we're all so busy trying to be understood that we forget to try and understand, and we get misinterpreted and then double down in defense, being defined by an enemy, that we just are perceived to be assholes. So, I mean, I think we definitely toe the line sometimes, but it's only because our story becomes mutated. The story that we tell ourselves becomes mutated. It's the Northern Ireland problem. I sadly see now that the USA today is where Northern Ireland was in the mid-1970s, at the worst of our division. One group's identity is based on the perceived existence of an enemy. And it's possibly even where the climate debate is going, where, it's between politicians and activists and those who absolutely know how they feel and are just bent on the existence of being right. So it got me thinking that everywhere, pretty much everyone is being taught that it's very important to be right. And we do mental somersaults to justify our past behavior based on this. But you will never get anybody to change their mind by telling them that they're wrong. And I think this is one of the biggest problems that just carries forward into the future as a defeat. But if we replaced the clash of right and wrong in any conflict or debate, no matter how big or small, personal or global, with the perception of better and worse, it should become much clearer what needs to be done, what it is we actually want, where we want to go. So what do we actually want? Have you ever noticed that when you ask people what they want, they tend to answer with what they don't want? And maybe it's because we basically have made it impossible to have public discourse between people who disagree with each other because we all feel under attack. We all feel that we must defend ourselves, or rather we must defend the story that we've told ourselves. So we're not getting the story that we were delivered or that we were promised. It must be somebody else's fault. And we can clearly see that when you look at it, all people, no matter where they're from or what they believe, they just want the same things: safety, community, dignity, and purpose. These should be easy for all living things to accomplish, so we can go on to focusing on other problems like this. But what if I told you we didn't have a climate problem? The world is not broken, it's doing exactly what it should. For all the problems we face in a rapidly growing, changing environment, there are solutions that we're just not rallying around. So it is a story problem that we have. We live in a cacophony of conflicting stories that cancel each other out and suit the person telling them, not the person being told to. And imagine a scenario we could all get behind one single better story. Not one where we're too busy arguing over what to play in the radio of our spaceship to deal with the smoke coming out of the engine, but at this moment in history, we got to remember that we made it all up. And we can do it again, but this time in harmony. We have to start acting as one species with one destiny. We're not going to survive if we don't start doing that. So let's agree on a shared history. Remember to be better ancestors. This is the only place where people live. It's the only place where people can live. It's where all the music is made. It's where all the good food is. It's where all of the stories are told. It's the only place where anything means anything. Therefore, it is both the location of all the problems in the known universe and also the only place where we're going to find any of the solutions. So whatever story we tell of the future of life is down to us. We have work to do. Thank you.
Just like baby, I've been joining forces with the likes of an A-team.
Bloomberg 4-mile relay. All they do is win, 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 no matter what. We'll see you next year.
Please welcome to the stage Aaron Latimer, advisor of Racing to Zero, and Graham Zimmerman, professional alpinist and director of Protect Our Winters Athlete Alliance, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Jason Kelly.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back. You can tell I'm talking about sports now because I'm not wearing a jacket. And earlier I was talking about money, and that was serious. I'm so excited to have this crew with us. Before we jump in, I do just want to mention the video you just saw, the Square Mile Relay. We're so psyched to be having it tomorrow. We have a Square Mile Relay participant here with us. There are still spots left, so if you want to lose to Aaron, please, you can run with the team or just come and cheer people on. Register, find more info at squaremilerelay.com. All right, that's your public service announcement. Now let's talk about sports. I'm so excited to have both of you, as I mentioned, because as we all think about how to talk about these issues in a world that is very divided and complicated, one of the things we can all agree about generally or disagree about in a good way is sports. Both of you were incredibly accomplished athletes. I want to start, if you could, using a little trick that we use sometimes on TV, which is introduce yourself. Tell us what you do, because I want to understand each of your relationships, not just to your sport, but to this broader issue. So, Graham, let me start with you.
Yeah, I'll start out by saying it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, Jason, for having us up here, and thank you for everybody for showing up and being a part of this conversation. So my name's Graham Zimmerman, and I've been a professional mountain climbing athlete for the last 15 or 20 years. And what that means is I go to the big mountains of the world with small teams to try big technical routes that have never been climbed before. And it's been a really...
So no big deal.
I mean, it's just what I do. And it's, I guess I could say it's gone pretty well. I've won a bunch of awards for it. We've made a bunch of first ascents that we're very proud of. I've also had some incredible partnerships that I've come away with. And it's also been a place where we've seen a lot of climate impacts. When we talk about the high altitude, high latitude parts of the world, they're places where we're seeing some really, really dramatic impacts. And that's something that I'll share, has also been supported by, I actually have an academic background in glaciohydrology. So for me, as somebody who's been going to these mountains, the climate crisis has been something that has been a really big part of my life for a long time.
Right. So, Aaron, jump on in here. You've had a similar, certainly similar success, and also a similar worldview. So help us understand it from your perspective.
Yeah, so I'm a two-time Paralympian in the sport of alpine skiing. I represented Canada. I grew up in Toronto. And I competed in the 2014 and 2018 Paralympics in alpine skiing. So for those that don't know, it's the event that you go around poles. And it's a timed event. I retired from sport in 2018, primarily because I had the type of sport that you're traveling around the world, going wherever snow is. So inside training is not an option, really like a viable option for alpine skiing. So I wanted to go to university and kind of have those other things that I wasn't able to do while competing in high performance sport. Retired from sport, I went to the University of Toronto and studied environmental studies. And then I started working at a Canadian bank. They had an athlete program, and so I was working there as in an internship position. And then it just so happened that they also had a corporate sustainability team. So I was very fortunate. It was all very serendipitous. I used my academic background, moved into what was going to be a contract role with a parental leave, ended up working with that team, and then went to a conference recently and got connected with Racing to Zero, which is an organization which helps sport organizations think about and reduce their environmental impact. And so I volunteer with them on the side of my day job.
And so I want to try and stay with you for a second, Aaron. I mean, that moment or that decision to sort of blend these, sort of vocations, avocations together, like, what was the key moment for you in understanding it's like, oh, okay, this is the way to do it? And why do you think you made this decision with this specific organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just they were in front of me. I met them at a conference, and I said, hey, this is an important issue that I care about. So I knew that, and we'll talk about it later, like I'm so aware of the environmental challenges in sport, but I hadn't seen any organizations that were Olympian-founded, Paralympian-founded that were working on it. And so it was really just a matter of like, serendipitously were at a conference together, and I thought this is perfect because I had sort of settled into my corporate career. I'd spent so much time in sport that I wanted to really like focus on things outside of sport for a while, but it felt like the timing was really right where I did have the capacity, and I felt like the knowledge where I could sort of jump back in and get involved in something that I felt really passionate about, which was sport and the environment.
So Graham, pick up on that because, you know, you have the academic background as well. What's the sort of key nexus here? Like, what's the key intersection where you feel like you can take this forward in a powerful way?
Yeah, I think that to really describe that, I'll tell the story of how I was pulled into the advocacy space. So I was a professional alpinist going to the mountains over and over again and going to these climbs, pursuing this career and seeing these climate impacts. But because of the perceived hypocrisy around personal climate footprint or carbon footprint, I really felt like I didn't have a place within the conversation around how we take on the climate crisis. And that was something that really that made it so that I felt like I needed to be quiet. And there's an organization called Protect Our Winters that approached me back in about 2015 and said, hey, listen, like with your stories from the big mountains, with this career that you're having in alpine climbing, we would love to set you up to advocate for climate action. And I was like, you know, guys, like, do you have any idea how much time I spend on an airplane? Like, I can't be a climate advocate.
Right.
And they were like, oh no, like we would love to coach you through how actually this is exactly what you should be doing. And the primary thrust of that is that we've been sold this idea that personal change is how we take on the climate crisis, when in fact systemic change is the way that we actually deal with this thing. And that's like part of the reason why I'm so excited to be here is because I think that a lot of the things that we're thinking about here at this conference are systemic solutions to the climate crisis. And just to kind of like talk about that for just a moment, when like if I'm going to talk about things that I can take on in my life, like I could stop flying, I could put solar panels on my home, I can buy an EV, but what does that require me to do? That requires me to spend a lot of money that a lot of folks don't necessarily have. And it requires me to isolate myself from these global experiences that have brought me so much value and so much like visibility in terms of what's going on in the world around me. And that means that what we would be asking folks to do is to either give up a lot of the things that make living in modern society like really, really valuable, or have to spend a lot of money in order to like decarbonize. Whereas if we move forward with systemic solutions, then we move into the space where we can all move forward together. Just like no matter how much money we have, no matter where we kind of sit in the social strata, we can move forward together towards a clean energy future where we can like continue to engage with the things that make living in modern society so valuable.
And so, Aaron, pick up on that. Like, what does systemic change look like? I mean, you've been doing this work now. You're in the financial sector. You have this, you know, athletic background. Help us work through that. I mean, this is an audience that is deeply invested in this. How should we approach systemic change?
Yeah, so from a sport lens, there's so many different worlds of sport. So professional sport is like a whole different space. I'll speak to Olympic and Paralympic sport. So right now, unlike the private sector, there's not any regulation really, and so there's nothing really forcing any organization or like major events like the Olympics, the host cities. There's nothing enforcing them to like think about sustainability, make more environmentally sound decisions. So that's kind of like a big piece where they're not thinking about it, they're not forced to do it, and so it's just sort of like out of the goodness of their heart if they are doing it. So the true systemic change would come from that sort of like higher level, so it's an organizing body that would generally come through some sort of like policy or innovation. We're seeing the Paris Olympics, they have sustainability really built into like the core of their event. However, there's nothing to say that like that's actually going to happen in the next event, because again, there's no like frameworks or regulation that's going to sort of incentivize people to do so. A lot of the focus, though, that people often have is like on that individual action, which is, again, like very limited in scope. As like, okay, so what if we just don't do our sport? What difference is that going to make? So I think in sport it's tough because, again, we're not saying that, neither of us, I believe, think that you should just like cancel all mega sporting events, major sport competitions, because they bring so much. There's a huge opportunity in sport to inform and inspire people and organizations to unite, because sport isn't the same as like other realms where it's very politicized and polarized. In a similar way, climate change doesn't have boundaries. It's really a collective action issue. So we can use sport in a positive way. I do, however, believe that there are some changes that have to happen from the top down that are maybe a little bit more mindful about maybe the frequency of the events that we have. And I'm thinking from like, if you think about all the sports in the Olympics, I don't know, how many are there in the Summer Olympics?
I don't know, a lot.
A lot, okay, a lot of sports. Let's say 30. There's definitely more than 30. So those 30 sports are also independently every year competing and training around the world, in addition to the Olympics every 4 years. So like, then you add the Winter Olympics too. So there's just like all of these different like sport bodies like roaming around, emitting, gathering in large mega events. And so can we do that a little bit more like efficiently? I think we can. Maybe travel a little bit less, maybe more local competitions, things like that. So long-winded answer, but that's what some sort of systemic change would look like from that world.
And do you see, Graham, any impetus from governing bodies, be they, you know, local, national, international, to take up that mantle in your sport, for instance?
It's a really good question. I think that within mountain climbing, there are less governing bodies than there are like the International Olympic Committee. But I do think that within the community of climbing, we are seeing a transition away from people looking at going to the mountains as a place just of escape, but also as a place where we can go gather these stories in order to drive the change that we need in the world. And that really like gets to the core of why I'm really excited to be here and really excited to be chatting with the two of you, is that I see sport and I see athletes as folks who can be these messengers around this work. And a big part of my role at Protect Our Winners at this point is both to be a pro athlete, but then also to help take other athletes on that journey of, hey, listen, you're somebody who goes out and does these incredible things. You're somebody who inspires communities, and you have a career that is based on that. And I would love for you to, within the purview of that career, be advocating for some of these things that matter for everybody on this planet. And sport has this incredible tradition of that. It's something we're bringing into the outdoor sports space at Protect Our Winners, and it's something that brings me a lot of optimism when it comes to where we're going with this climate conversation.
Aaron, have you seen any meaningful change among your peers and maybe some of your former competitors that these issues are more front of mind? I mean, have you had experiences, I would imagine both of you have had experiences that sort of force you to think about these issues, right? What's it like sort of because the vast majority of us, I'm sure there are some amazing athletes out there, but the vast majority of us are not Olympians, Paralympians. Like, what's it like on the inside?
Yeah, so I would say I'm very encouraged because now there are so many athletes and organizations like Racing to Zero, Protect Our Winters, who are actually engaging in this in the issue of climate change. At my last major competition, that was 2018, so 6 years ago now, I competed at the Paralympics in South Korea, and I had shared this anecdote earlier. I was like deeply disturbed because one of the venues that I was using, you don't, as an athlete, you're not always thinking about these things. I think both the everyday person and the athlete are a little bit more critical and thoughtful, like, throughout their life now, instead of just sort of like floating through, like we're kind of asking like deeper questions of like, what was the impact of this? So in this case, it's pretty obvious. So it was a ski venue that didn't previously exist, and this was in South Korea. They had 2 ski venues. One of them, it was like a forested area, but it had been basically like dynamited, and there were 3 ski runs, and afterwards they were just going to replant some trees. And so that actually, like, there were 500-year-old trees there, and I was competing like a couple of days. So I thought, like, this doesn't seem right that for me to ski here, we're destroying, like, this ecosystem. All of the snow was artificial. Like, that just, like, did not seem right. And then the Olympics after that, which was in Beijing, I believe that 100% of the snow for Alpine was artificial. So in those senses, like, I don't know what the trends are from, like, the host cities. Again, that's why it's very dependent on the host city. But I'm very encouraged from sport organizations who are starting to engage with the issues, athlete advocates, and just like everyday people who are becoming a lot more thoughtful, critical, and asking the right questions, because we should be asking the questions. We shouldn't say, oh, this is a great venue. Can't wait to ski down it.
Right. Sorry about your trees.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, we were talking about this a little bit backstage. I was just in the Utah Olympic Park, and someone in Salt Lake, which I believe is probably, it's going to be announced relatively soon. They're going to bid for the 2034 games, I believe. Salt Lake City is a place that has used still uses every single venue from the 2002 games. So you're starting to see people think about it in a pretty meaningful way. I think LA is going to try and do the same for those Olympics. All right, we have 90 seconds left. We've got a great engaged audience here. What is your best advice as individuals? And again, I'm going to go out on a limb and say sporty, outdoorsy people, many of these folks, how do they best engage with their sports as they think about being a responsible athlete? I'll start with you, Graham.
I'll share that I think that sports give us incredible stories that we can utilize to bring people together. And when I first started in the climate conversation, I was talking about these high altitude, high latitude areas where climate impacts were showing up. And the thing that has changed over the last few years is now that these impacts are showing up for each of us almost every day and in every sport that we participate in. And those stories are a really powerful way for us to build common ground with people around us, bring people into the conversation, and give people a space within this climate advocacy tent, because we need more people advocating. And sports are an amazing way to do that. And that's something I would super encourage you to do, is think about stories that you have, of ways you were impacted, utilize those to bring people into the tent, utilize that to bring people into the conversation, and drive collective action around climate.
Erin, last word to you. You get the final word to the group.
Woo. I would say use your sport to connect to the natural world, because climate change can seem very abstract, but when we're out there enjoying a natural space, it's going to make us feel like we want to do something, we want to care about it. And then the second piece is to connect with your peers, tap into organizations that exist. I think a lot of us have been intimidated to engage in climate issues because we're not experts. You don't have to be an expert. You know, connect with your peers, or again, those existing organizations, which there are more of, to support and join the cause. And you don't have to have the great idea. You can be supporting the great idea. You could be learning, and all of these things do make a difference.
All right. As Jim Coulter said earlier, let's get to work. Thank you both. Thanks so much. Thanks, guys.
Please welcome to the stage Jay Inslee, Governor of Washington State, for conversation with Bloomberg's Anna Edgerton.
I'm here, okay. All right.
Hello, it's so nice to see so many people here. Governor Inslee, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to speak with you. I think here in Washington State, we have to start with the Climate Commitment Act. And this is your 2021 law that sets up the state's carbon auctions, reinvests that revenue in other climate-related programs, and a possible repeal will be before voters in Washington State in November. You've described that as a costly mistake for the state. What happens if this law and all of these programs just go away?
Well, I would say it's not a costly mistake. It is a cataclysmic loss, and we do not intend to lose. And by the way, I want to welcome everybody to the state of Washington, the most innovative state in the most beautiful country and the most wonderful planet in the solar system. So welcome. You are in the right place. And because we recognize the incredible state we have, we do not intend to lose her. We do not intend to surrender to a pollution blanket that allows special interests to rip us off and then burn us up. And so we have an incredible tool against that pollution blanket, which is the Climate Commitment Act. This act reduces pollution. It limits pollution. And by the way, we don't say this enough. Climate change means pollution, and people do not like pollution. And we need to speak of it as pollution because that's what it is. And this, in the first instance, puts a limit on pollution, and it is the most aggressive limit on pollution.
On carbon emissions.
On carbon emissions in the United States. Secondly, it creates a fund to help families and businesses enjoy the incredible innovative work we're doing in a clean energy future, to help people get heat pumps, to help children get air filtration system in their schools so they can breathe when these forest fires are polluting our skies, so that we can get electric school buses, so we can have better ways to fireproof our facilities, to get people, by the way, we're proud of this, first program to help lower income people get a lease on an electric vehicle as well. So it is both a limit on pollution which affects our health, and this is a health issue. It is not just the polar bears. It is our children who are being subjected to an epidemic of asthma. So that's worth fighting for, and we intend to win this.
So I wanted to talk about these programs because we've already seen just the threat of repeal is impacting the demand for carbon credits and thus the revenue that comes in. So the most recent auction in June brought in less than $190 million compared to nearly $660 million in the second quarter of last year. So I was wondering if you could explain a little bit what this huge swing in revenue means for those programs that are funded through this Climate Commitment Act.
Well, we actually do not think of this as a troublesome sign. This is still going to produce billions of dollars of revenue to help families through this transition, to help companies get going, and we have so many companies that are doing great work here. So we feel it's actually working. What you look at these carbon auction systems, you've typically seen a reduction over time, even when there is no initiative. So we believe we are on a good pace. It is a stable market, and importantly, all of the credits were sold. Over $300 million of money was spent. So there is a demand for this. We think this system is working. And it's working in ways that, we think of this globally, of the global challenge we have. But I think of it from a family perspective. I met a woman over in Walla Walla. She runs a hospice facility, and we got her a heat pump into her facility. And I was asking her about it, and when she was telling me about the difference it's made for her patients, her residents, she started crying. And I go, why are you crying? And she said, you don't understand the difference it's made to the people who, are at the end of life, to be able to have a comfortable room to set their heating in a place that's very, very hot. This is something I look at as a very personal issue for the benefits. And these folks who are trying to take these benefits away is just remarkably callous of A, being climate deniers when we know this pollution is killing the planet, and B, want to take things away from my families. And I'm not going to let anybody take anything away from families in the state of Washington. They deserve this, and they're going to get it.
So I wanted to talk about these people, because the last time we spoke, you described those pushing back on your climate work as forces who want to give up on progress. So there are a lot of people who are concerned about the climate, maybe not part of the activist community, but see the impacts of it every day, but might not agree with this approach or might have different ideas. And I was wondering how we make combating climate change and making this a priority the biggest tent possible, to bring in people of different political persuasions, different ideologies, and make sure that everyone feels like there's a place for them in this fight.
Well, the good news is the vast majority of Washingtonians understand climate science. They're not like the MAGA person that denies it and calls it a hoax and says that wind turbines cause cancer. That is a minority position. Vast majorities of Washingtonians understand the scientific principles behind climate change. And the way we do this is that folks are now experiencing this in their own lives. 10, 15 years ago, climate change was a graph. It was CO2 parts per million. Now it is the fact that your child can't go outside in August, and this is a reality, 2 of the last 4 years. Our kids couldn't go outside because of the smoke they're choking on from the fires in Canada and from our own forests.
We felt that in Washington, D.C. last year.
Washington, D.C. Yeah. They're now experiencing the tremendous heat. They're seeing salmon runs decline, that they can't go fishing. they're now experiencing this in a real world. So people are demanding, and we should respond to give them solutions to this problem. Now, the other thing is, and I'm going to talk about the moral aspect of this, but the economic aspect too, they are now experiencing the benefits of this economically. They're getting heat pumps. They're getting help for electric school buses. They're getting help for air filtration systems in our schools. They're getting all of this assistance, and they're getting jobs. This is the greatest job-creating opportunity we have. I can't throw a rock without hitting a clean energy company and the jobs that have been created. So they have a take-home, where you take home pay associated with this innovation. And the innovation in our state is really leading the nation, frankly, on the things we're doing. The advanced battery manufacturing 2 plants, most advanced silicon anode batteries in the world are in Moses Lake, Washington. We're making aerospace fuel out of carbon dioxide and water in Moses Lake, Washington at the 12 company. You just can't overstate the amount of job creation that's going on. So this is a pocketbook issue with folks. But when you ask, how are we going to get folks to buy into this? Because basically we all share something, which is a sense of morality. This is a moral issue. It is not just an economic one. It is a moral issue because it is a commitment to our children. And everybody shares that, regardless, in some deep way, to want to take care of their kids. And I believe we need to talk this more, that this is a moral cause, not just an economic one.
And the kids get it.
The kids certainly get it. Well, I'll tell you, you go to a 7th grade class and you ask them who believes there's climate change, and 95% of the hands go up, and who believes we should do something about it, and 96% go up. So does my math add up there? I'm not really
Don't worry
sure
about it.
Anyway, yeah, the kids get it, and they're the ones who are going to be living with it, right? And this is personally how I look at this. It's why I'm so passionate about that. Trudy and I have 6 grandkids. They've been officially declared the cutest grandkids in Washington State.
My parents might disagree, but...
And, are they going to be able to ski? You just had some athletes here talking about ski. Are they going to be able to ski in the Cascade Mountains? Well, that's very much in doubt right now. Are they going to be able to have their kids go out and not breathe forest fire smoke in August? That's in doubt. We've lost 40% of the volume of ice on Mount Rainier during my lifetime. Imagine to project at the end of their lifetime. I looked out my window this morning, and I was reminded all of the kelp around Bainbridge Island has disappeared, dead. Climate change has killed something that has been endemic, these beautiful kelp forests that were previously in Puget Sound. So this is a moral issue, and that's what's going to unite us ultimately.
So you were the one that brought up former President Trump, and I wanted to ask about the stakes for November. Obviously, there's going to be a race to elect your successor here in Washington State, but you've also served in Washington in the House of Representatives, and with the House, the Senate, the White House in play in November, there's been a lot of talk about that over the past 2 days here, but if you could just briefly describe in your own words how you see the stakes for the country in November.
It's the difference between a chance to arrest this horrific train coming down the tracks or letting it run over us. That's the issue in these federal elections. And I don't overstate this. Look, we've had some real progress on the federal level. The Inflation Reduction Act has meant so much by creating this new innovation science. We're seeing the impact in our state with job creation. It's been a wonderful tool. So we've had some really tremendous momentum. But we know that if the election goes with the climate deniers, that'll stop. That'll come to an absolute stop. And I hate to say that, but that is the reality. And it's very sad to say that. I wish we had 2 parties working on this. It deserves to have both parties working on this, but unfortunately there's only one at the moment. So at the moment, the only safe place, frankly, for a Republican is out of office. And I will say that. That's what I believe. That's what I believe.
Given all that.
What's that? I want to say that on a nonpartisan basis, okay? So
we'll allow you to have your partisan moment. But given all that, given those stakes, is President Biden the best person to defeat Trump in November?
Well, I just focus on how horrific the former president was on this issue. To have any person in public life deny the existence of climate change is unbelievable, and he needs to be kept out of office.
So the stakes are high.
The stakes are high. I believe President Biden has done some great work on climate, but we got to focus on keeping Donald Trump out of office. That's what I'm focused on, and winning this initiative too. By the way, for those who are interested in this issue, it's not just the White House. We have a battle here with those folks who want to eliminate the Climate Commitment Act.
So is Biden the best person to do that in November?
People will make that decision, but I can tell you he's done some great work on climate change. I know there's questions, but again, I want to focus on beating Donald Trump. That's what I'm focused on.
You've talked about a lot of stuff that's happened here in Washington State that you're very much hoping stays in place, that would be the best option for the state. What else have you done at the state level that should be replicated on a federal level by the next Democratic administration, be it Biden or someone else? Are there any Washington State policies that should be is it time for a national carbon market? Or
So I think, first off, this has worked in our state. We would recommend it to every other jurisdiction because it has worked really effectively in reducing pollution and helping families through this transition. So it's been a very successful program. But beyond that, we need some additional help in the transportation sector. We have a clean fuel standard, but we need the federal government to move forward to allow us to adopt a clean car standard along with California. I mentioned this lease program that I would recommend to people. We need to get lower income people get access to electric vehicles. We're doing very well on this. We've had almost 1 in 5 cars this last year to be EVs, but we want to expand and accelerate that program. We think that our building codes have been extremely successful, and this is the little secret thing in fighting climate change. We need to keep wasting energy heating and cooling our homes and offices, and we have, I think, fair to say, the best building codes so that we bring efficiency. People get less energy costs heating and cooling their homes, and I'm very, very proud in that regard. So these are all suites of things we've done in our state. I would recommend to other states and the federal government, and I think that's possible in both places.
You mentioned building codes. There's also another ballot initiative that has not yet been certified by the Secretary of State to prohibit bans on natural gas. Do you see this in kind of the same level of concern as the CCA repeal, or is it more about watching the strategy potentially be successful in rolling back some of the climate initiatives that you've done here in Washington?
Well, I think both laws are good laws, and we should preserve them. And you hate to ever choose between your children or which one you love the most. But if you force me into that, I would say that the Climate Commitment Act is the great-grandmother of all our activities and would be the largest impact to preserve. And it's the most immediate, too. The other one, frankly, is planning decades ahead from now. This is one that's right now that we have to preserve. And it's working right now. It's helping people get that work. It's helping build our ferry boats. Look, we desperately need new ferry boats. We have 5 now in order of electric ferry boats. If the climate commitment goes back, there's no money there to build new fireboats or new ferry boats. So this is an immediate need. It's where the battle is being fought, and I'm energized by it.
So speaking of being energized, you have said that you're planning to run through the tape in your last year as governor. So I know that you still have a lot ahead of you into the fall and into the end of the year. But you've also been very much a national leader, a national voice in this climate conversation. So I'd like to ask what's next for you, not just in terms of like whatever job you might pursue, but also how you inspire the rest of us to make this a priority, because the last time you wanted to do that, you ran for president.
Well, that didn't work out really well.
You tried. We did talk about climate.
Well, no, in a sense, it did work out well because, 80% of what we proposed has happened in the federal government. So it did have an impact, I think. So that was a beneficial thing for all of us. I will be involved in this passion that we have, Trudy and I have, of giving our grandchildren a shot in life. That's what this is all about. And I will be involved in spreading optimism about the clean energy fight and helping effectuate it in some sense. I don't know in what vehicle yet. We will see in what vehicle, but I will be in this fight until they lay me down. Because we live in a very special moment, and I've made this argument. I'm not sure anybody agrees with it or not, but if you look at the whole scope of human history, there is no group of people that are more consequential for the whole species through time. There's been world wars, there's been bubonic plague, they've all these other things. But we live in the most consequential moment of human history because our ability to tame climate change is the one that will set the course for millennia. And we have to win this. And the reason I say this is that, you know, with all of our frustrations about this issue, it's a great time to be alive because we have something that we can do that's very meaningful, and we can win this. And by the way, there's a reason for optimism. Look, we've increased our solar by 400% in the last 5 years, wind by 45%. The price of solar energy has come down 90%. The day before yesterday, I went to 2 fusion companies which have promised that might give us fusion energy coming right out of Washington State, zero waste, infinite energy. So there is cause for optimism on this. We are accelerating our progress dramatically. It's just that we got to pick up the pace. So what we need to know is that we're capable of doing these things. It's just we need to do them faster.
In the face of this collective challenge, is that, in a time of division, is that collective challenge kind of the unifying call that we all need?
Is it which? I'm sorry?
Kind of a unifying call that, you know, especially as, you know, the younger generation, the 7th graders that you're talking about, you know, agents of being the next realm of leaders, how do we make sure that that kind of unity of purpose stays with them?
Well, I think by appealing to people where they live and what they care about. If you have children, you might want to do something to give them a future. If you have grandchildren, nieces, nephews, or you just have a neighbor, it's the same thing. If you're a business person and you want to look at how you grow your economy, we are one of the hottest economies in the world right now because of our clean energy revolution that we are experiencing. And when I meet the entrepreneurs, they continue to come to the state of Washington because we recognize that innovation potential on an economic basis. And if you simply like to look at snow in the mountains, we got that solution for you too. So you just meet people to ask them what's important in their life and then talk with them about how to make sure their dreams are realized. And this is something all of us can share in. That's the other thing in these fights. Look, you don't have to be governor or president or senator to get involved in this fight. Everybody here has a social network. Everybody here can, you know, go home and tell people what you think about this issue. And I encourage people to do that, whatever that is. We have power. We have authority in our own lives to affect this. And I encourage people to do that.
Governor Inslee, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good luck. Good luck.
Please welcome to the stage Sage Lenier, climate activist, Gina McCarthy, former U.S. National Climate Advisor and EPA Administrator, and Managing Co-Chair of the America is All In Coalition, and Melanie Nakagawa, Chief Sustainability Officer of Microsoft, for a conversation with Bloomberg's John Frere.
Thank you. Thank you. So leadership is the big issue we're going to be talking about on this panel. There was a lot of energy and dynamism here at the Green Festival from innovators, artists, policymakers, et cetera, but how can this sort of bottom-up energy be channeled into meaningful change by leaders, whether it's in the field of politics, business, or activism? Gina, let me start with you. It's a presidential year like no other for many different reasons, and we'll get into some of that later on. But you joined the Biden White House in 2021 and were part of some of the huge climate actions that have been taken since then. The IRA is probably the most consequential piece of climate legislation ever passed in this country. It was designed to create jobs for American workers, to reinvigorate the American economy, and yet the Biden administration is not getting credit for it. It doesn't seem to be resonating. Why is that?
Actually, it's resonating in the marketplace because it's working. The Inflation Reduction Act now has generated about $370 billion in private sector investment. We're talking about almost 600 new projects. We're talking about 300,000 jobs. So it's working. It's done its job. But keep in mind that this was a 10-year bill. So these benefits continue for another 8 years. So we are really just getting started. And one of the ways I really recognized that this was going to be a big deal was when, after we actually passed the legislation, we immediately found the EU and others squawking about it as being protectionist. That's when I knew we had something here. Right. But instead of continuing with that discussion, they started to pass their own legislation that was very similar. So it has developed a partnership opportunity that I think is leading to the public and private sector beginning to understand that if we're going to tackle a challenge as large as climate change, we have to partner together.
But it does have, consequential acts like this have a long time horizon, but those time horizons are much shorter than the electoral cycle. So, it is sort of part of the job of leadership to communicate and to explain that to people. Why do you think that doesn't seem to have worked?
I think that if you look at this, and one of the reasons why I'm doing work with America is All In, is subnationals know what's going on. People in communities that see these benefits know what's going on. And so I'm really not concerned with the time horizon. I'm concerned with people seeing that there is an opportunity to address climate change in a way that's going to benefit them. Not ask for sacrifice, not ask for them to give anything up, but it's going to make their lives better. And frankly, it's going to clean up our air and keep people healthier. That's what matters to me. And I think that what matters to the general public.
Now, Sage, you're a young activist. And, we were talking earlier that, on a similar point, this message about climate and the need to act on climate doesn't seem to be landing with people, in your opinion. Why do you think that is? And what needs to be done about it?
I think it's less about not landing. I think the majority of people at this point understand that climate change is a problem, but they're still under-equipped for solving it. If you ask the average person what is their understanding of climate solutions, they're probably going to say electric vehicles. They might say something like recycling, which is not a climate solution. We still haven't reached the general public with an understanding of what realistic next steps look like outside of solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles. It really is an incredibly dynamic system change that we need, not just in our energy system, but in our economy, in our food system, and we can't solve problems we don't understand. There was a recent report from LinkedIn that said that Gen Z is so under-equipped Gen Z is so underskilled in sustainability that we actually pose a threat to climate progress. The reason for that is that we are exactly as skilled as the generations before us. There's just not the training out there that we need. So our higher education institutions, which, proportionately are churning out our future decision makers in government and in the private sector, are still failing to deliver a real systems thinking, framework for how to solve climate change so that we can go and address that in our careers. I'm the director of an organization called Sustainable and Just Future. Our work is in making climate solutions a curriculum priority in U.S. universities because we're trying to fill this gap. I think it really, thank you. Thank you. But yeah, we are the first generation to grow up feeling the effects of climate change. We have a massive fire season. So many of us have, from a very young age, either lost homes, have friends who lost their homes to whether it's disasters, floods. And so I don't think it's a lack of caring. It's a lack of skills and knowledge.
And people are feeling overwhelmed by the scale of all the different things that need to be done.
Right. When you go, this was my experience when I was an undergraduate at Berkeley. I was taking the environmental curriculum there, and I looked around at everyone, and I was like, so we all have depression? Because it was so focused on, understanding the nuances of the problem and how bad the problem is, it felt like there was nothing that could be done. So I went out and actually started looking for an understanding for myself of what the solutions were in all these different intersections. And so I started teaching when I was 19 at Berkeley, And that program is called Solutions for a Sustainable and Just Future, so the nonprofit. It's a shortening of that. And that is the largest student-led class Berkeley has ever had. We have had thousands of students go through that program, and we always have like really heavy wait lists, and it's because there's such a demand from young people for these kinds of things.
Can I ask you a question about activist tactics? So I live in London, and you know, in the UK, these very sort of confrontational climate activist groups like Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion have been making headlines now for a long time. You know, throwing soup at painting, at very, very valuable paintings, spray painting, breaking into airports and spray painting private jets, blocking freeways. And their point is nothing else is working. This might be annoying. You might feel like we're in your face about this, but this is the only way we can find to shake people out of their sort of complacency. What do you think about that form of confrontational activism?
I've been asked before whether or not I would like condemn their tactics. I absolutely won't. I do think that there needs to be like a set of standards in the climate space for, you know, what interventions we're taking. So blocking freeways and blocking the working class is not going to reach people in the way we want to. But spray painting private jets and throwing soup on paintings, it works. Yeah. You know, it gets the headlines we need, it gets the attention we need, and it's inconveniencing the very richest people in a small way too. You know, someone asked me about like, you know, like, oh, well, the slashing of tires, and I'm like, well, they have 20 cars to choose from. So, yeah, I mean, I think that we need a variety of tactics. We need people working on this from the private sector, from education, from in government policy, but I think that the power of direct action and activism is really powerful.
Now, Melanie, we've talked about policy, we've talked about activism. You have moved from the policy world to the business world. You know, in terms of the difference you can make, what are sort of the biggest differences between the two universes that you've experienced?
And I actually started my career in the nonprofit space as well. And so I think the biggest differences between all of these, well, first and foremost is where they're all aligned, which is they're all focused around driving transformative change, whether it's advocacy or government or corporation, and using their perches in the economy to do that. And that's, for me, you know, moving from government to corporate world. The thing that's been the same has been getting to work, one, with incredible people. So wherever I've been, it's been people that are mission aligned, that are driven and focused around sustainability, and that's what remains the same. I think the differences have been, frankly, where you can drive that impact and how you scale that impact, which coalitions you're part of. In the corporate sector, we get to align with other corporations and drive impact at scale through procurement. When we line up around whether it's, you know, procuring around sustainable aviation fuel, looking for low carbon cement, low carbon steel, or low carbon chips that we put into data centers, that kind of scalable procurement is a key area where you could see even greater volume of change that can happen when you move from a government to corporations and when you partner together in that space and deliver an outsized impact.
And, you know, big corporations, you know, can really sort of set the agenda and change what people think. So Tesla's the obvious example. Tesla has proven that you can, you know, that electric cars are a real thing, and they've literally transformed the entire industry. However, at the same time, big companies can disappoint and demotivate when they're caught doing greenwashing, and there is, you know, a lot of people are skeptical about some of the big sustainability claims made by big corporations. How do you cut through the noise of that cynicism?
I think is first is being as transparent as possible, being really clear-eyed exactly what methodologies you use to make those claims, what data you're using, where the sources of data you're pulling forward, and publishing that. I mean, whether it's, you know, as one of the largest corporate buyers of carbon dioxide removal, and we've published 3 white papers that go into great detail on which contracts we sign, which companies we work with, the methodologies we're applying to each of that work. And we're doing that across the board in all the different areas. I think transparency is such a key part. It helps define what you're for, what you're doing, and the work you're trying to put in place to meet your commitments. And for us, that's to be carbon negative, water positive, a zero waste company that protects ecosystems by 2030. And we put out a report every year saying where we're making progress, but also where are the areas we need to focus.
So you alluded earlier to carbon offsets, and of course Microsoft this week announced a big deal with Occidental, I think the biggest ever deal for direct air capture. And carbon offsets have had a very bad press over the last few years. What is the case for the defense, I guess, for those sorts of carbon offsets?
First is going to be, I think Sage made a good point, definitions and education. I was on a panel earlier today that they talked about, I think the line there was not all sustainable aviation fuels are the same, not all offsets are the same. And so first and foremost is really demonstrating, even within direct air capture or carbon capture, you have a wide range of what's there. So first for me is really defining what is an offset, what offsets are we backing and what are we for. For instance, we haven't done any avoided deforestation offsets in the last year's accounting, or for several years in fact. So that I think is a key area to think. But these are things where it's about definitions. I think one of the challenges we see is the word offset is a single word, but defines a wide range from dollars spent for that offset, the ease of actually acquiring that offset, to the suppliers of the market for that offset. So I think, when you say bad press, I'd love to just double click into that and, which category and which sector received the bad press versus, frankly, there's lots of great projects. There's so many people I'm meeting today at this conference that are doing incredibly wonderful work in the offset category, but this is having community benefit, local benefit. It's substantially improving lives and livelihoods, and those are the types of offsets that we want to be about and for.
I'm sure my colleague Akshat Rati could do an entire podcast with you about different categories of offsets.
He could take me to math camp on offsets, I'm sure.
Now, Gina, let's sort of talk about the elephant in the room. We have a major election coming up in November. I've heard. I live in London. I wasn't really aware of it, but I guess people are talking about it. We have been here before. Like, Trump is leading in the polls mostly. What should the climate community, if he wins, what are the, again, we've been here before, what are the tactics, what are the strategies that the climate community should be starting to think about?
Well, I think it's not just the climate community, obviously. We do have a big election coming up, and that election isn't just about climate, it's about democracy. It's about our freedom. That's what it's about. And so, I know that people will be challenged about who to vote for, but frankly, I know who not to. And that is the best thing that we can do.
But if it happens, again, we've been through this before, 2016.
Yeah.
How at risk do you think the IRA is? Which parts of it could be vulnerable?
Yeah. I get asked that a lot, and I think one of the challenges, let me just say, during the last administration of President Trump, what happened was that subnational government stood up. What happened was states and mayors stood up. One of the reasons why I'm looking at America is All In at Bloomberg as a good place to be is that we're continuing to arm mayors and governors with information on how to access the Inflation Reduction Act money so that they can grow in their communities, but also as a line of defense. If anyone starts chipping away at the federal government and its authority, we still have layers below that can do things and move forward. But frankly, it's never going to replace a president who cares about the economy, who cares about its people, who doesn't simply look at themselves, who actually will govern instead of do transactions that benefit them. So we have to stop that from being a possibility moving forward and not have to just rely on mayors and governors to put their fingers in the dike. That's what we have to do. And I don't feel at all strongly about that.
I mean, one final question on that. I guess it's sort of the key question. You know Joe Biden. You've worked with Joe Biden.
I do.
Do you think he should run again?
I think he should, honestly, what he's doing right now, and I think what he's been talking about, is he's really looking at that issue. And I think he's a good man who's done extraordinary work. This is going to be the climate president. And looking back, I'm going to wait and see what his final decision is, and I'll stand by him in terms of what that decision looks like.
Okay. Sage, this is, as we heard, a consequential election on many, many, many different levels. How do you think younger people are engaging with this, are thinking about this? You know, we have two very old presidents who, you know, don't look anything like sort of, you know, the younger generation. Is that turning people off, do you think?
Yeah, it is turning people off. I think I mean, you all know this is the most polarized we've ever been. I think I feel more encouraged by more and more people are considering running for office, running for the House, for the Senate, for local elections, because as we saw with Trump's last presidency, the presidency actually has way more power than I think most of us realize. There are fewer checks and balances than we realize. But that being said, you know, so much of what a president is able to do is limited by whether or not Congress agrees with them. And so we're looking and we're seeing, yeah, there's, you know, very, very, very elderly people. This is a very wealthy, white, you know, career politician Congress. And we don't feel represented with our interests, with our pain points. So I think seeing more people take this as kind of a radicalizing point and be more interested in local politics and also in, you know, new innovation in the private sector, new corporations coming up. I'm more interested in seeing new companies come out that are going to completely challenge the paradigm rather than looking at how to reform the existing one, and I think that also reflects with the public sector.
And who do you admire? Are there any particular companies you admire right now who are trying to do
Blue
that?
Land.
Who are they?
Blue Land is owned by a woman, or the CEO is a woman named Sarah Yu. She founded it, and it is a cradle-to-cradle certified cleaning company. And their products are a tablet. It's $2, so it's super affordable. And you put the tablet in the water, and it turns into a full bottle of cleaning. I love it because it's like fully natural. It eliminates the packaging. It eliminates the transportation waste. It's a really innovative model, and these are kinds of things like I'm trying to take this concept and see how we can translate that into, you know, okay, so this is a revolutionary idea. How do we transition this into other, you know, like how do we take this mentality and transition it into other, it's just like, it's really refreshing to see, like, instead of trying to fix that whole system, someone just went back to the drawing board and started something completely new, right? Yeah. And so I think I'd like to see more of that fresh energy in politics, in the private sector, everywhere.
Going back to the drawing board and starting from scratch and building anew.
Just a completely new, innovative idea.
Thank you very much. We're out of time. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Adam Met, founder and executive director of Planet Reimagined.
My climate story, that's what this few minutes is supposed to be about. My climate story is a very strange one, and in many ways it's not relatable at all. And so I'm going to tell you about it by telling you a few different kinds of stories. I'm going to tell you a story about music, yes, a story about climate, a story about research, and a story about action. So music first. I'm a musician. I'm in the middle of a 50-city U.S. tour right now. Last night we played in Dallas. Tomorrow we're in Phoenix. And then we are heading to Asia. We spend so much of our time touring. I'm in a band called AJR. It's totally fine if you've never heard of us. It's completely okay. 2 woos, okay? 2 woos is okay. 2 woos is okay. My climate story begins here. So the top picture that you're seeing is what one of our shows looks like now. A handful of years ago, we pulled into a venue in San Francisco, and it looked like the bottom picture with the orange sky. We literally had to wear gas masks going into the venue. We started our show early because so many fans were waiting outside because of the forest fires. The other picture that you see is representative of something that I saw this past summer when we were on tour in Athens. In minutes, the entire city flooded. We got to the venue. There was literally lightning happening while we were performing. The entire stage was flooded. And we moved on to the next city. Athens had to stay there and continue to clean up the floods. Now, this is something that I experience all the time on the road, the impacts of climate. And one of the reasons why I studied this more deeply is because I experienced it. In experiencing all of these different things, I ended up staying in school, and I did my PhD in sustainable development and human rights law. And then I ended up founding an organization called Planet Reimagined that is all about bridging research and action. And I'm going to tell you more about that in a moment. But first, when you're an artist and when you have an audience like this one, at least for me, it's a key part of my responsibility to be able to engage fans at a deep level. And so that's what we do on our tour. We spent a lot of time at Planet Reimagined figuring out how to do the social science research to figure out how to get fans to engage deeply around all different types of issues, in particular climate. And so what we did was a study. We spent the last year doing a really in-depth study with Ticketmaster and a handful of other partners. A poll went out to about 350,000 recent concert goers, from Taylor Swift fans to Beyonce fans, really just across the board, all different genres. And we asked them so many questions about how, where, when, why they want to participate in different climate actions. We put out this report, and this report basically says that the era of shut up and sing is over, that fans want artists to not only be talking about these things, but inviting their fans into taking action with them. And so now, at every stop of our US tour, we're doing things like this that you see on the screen. We're working with local organizations, obviously registering people to vote, but at a much deeper level, getting people engaged with local organizations, having them volunteer, petition, even calling their representatives right there on the concourse, on site. We're giving them pre-written scripts of how to ask them to vote in a certain way. And we are also partnered with the governor, who you probably heard from earlier, about saying no to 2117 right here in Washington. Now, at Planet Reimagined, our whole kind of idea behind the organization is about doing this really concrete research and turning it into something that's incredibly actionable. I'm going to tell you one more story. While the Inflation Reduction Act was being negotiated, I spent a lot of time in Congress, back when it was called Build Back Better. I sat down with just as many Republicans as Democrats to try and find areas of overlap. And as all of you in this room probably know, not a single Republican voted for the Inflation Reduction Act. However, I did end up finding some common ground in talking with both Republicans and Democrats. To take it back to this idea of research, we did a really in-depth study and looked at the current oil and gas leases in the United States. Then what we did is we overlaid that with a solar map and overlaid that with a wind map. And we found about 18 million acres of land that were not accounted for in any study yet, where we could expand renewable energy sitting on top of current oil and gas land, helping those oil and gas companies to transition their business. And this was all done through this kind of research. It was all done through a lot of listening to both Republicans and Democrats about what they wanted to achieve in terms of land use, in terms of energy, in terms of security, in terms of reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. So, what does that look like, right? What does it look like if we are going to put renewables on top of this land? It looks like this. Environmental review processes are incredibly important. However, on a lot of this oil and gas land, the environmental review process has already happened. It allows us to cut years out of the process for putting renewables across all of these acres. We have gathered all of this environmental review data already, and it'll just take a reanalysis as opposed to going out and starting from scratch. So speed is one of the key parts here. The next piece that's vital is space. There's so much virgin land out in the United States that we are all talking about putting solar and wind. It's incredibly important, except what if we could use land that's already disturbed? What if there was so much land that was already disturbed that based on our analysis, we could generate approximately 2,000 new gigawatts of renewable energy already sitting on top of oil and gas land? The next reason why this really makes sense across the board is equity. The energy communities across the western United States, particularly in places like New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Montana, they need a transition plan. These are energy communities are failing, and people are leaving, and this gives an opportunity to transition these small, independent oil and gas companies. In places like Wyoming and Utah and Colorado, a lot of the funding that goes to schools and goes to hospitals comes from oil and gas. This solution allows us to fill that gap and provide funding for schools and hospitals coming from renewable energy. So, the last piece that I want to talk about is opportunity, because we don't want to let any of these business owners to be left behind. Yes, they are oil and gas companies, but they are independent oil and gas companies that through market-based solutions like this one, we can help prove to them that this transition is viable for their own businesses, for the jobs of the people that they're employing, and for their bottom line. So this opportunity is this opportunity is a really important one, because in places like Utah, 75% of production is still coming from these independents. Now, the last thing that I want to share is here. This is a bit of a summary, but because we're running out of time, I'm going to fast forward a bit. It's a bipartisan solution. This is key here, right? Because so much of what happens when you're talking about the federal level happens when one party is in power versus when another party was in power. And Gina McCarthy was just talking about some incredibly important legislation, obviously the IRA, that was monumental and that Biden is going to be remembered as the climate president. However, we went into this research with an eye towards how can we achieve something that is not going to be rolled back depending on who is president at the time. We had an equal number of Republicans sign on because we pitched this as something focused around security, as something focused around jobs, as something focused around a local economy. And when we talked to Democrats, it was about removing carbon from the atmosphere, and it was about speeding up the energy transition. The same policy, but bringing it together from two different perspectives. All of this came from years' worth of research putting together this project. And now we are working with a whole bunch of different partners in order to build these pilots across places like New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota in order to set a new standard for how we can transition the oil and gas industry to renewables faster than we ever could before. Thank you. So, what's next? This idea of co-locating things, taking something and putting it on top of something else, already exists. You've heard of agrivoltaics, you've heard of photovoltaics. This idea can work in so many other places. Think about the wind, think about the oil and gas infrastructure that's out in the middle of the ocean. We can co-locate wind in the same places. We're working on this same solution for geothermal, for retired coal plants, for so many other applications. And those 2,000 gigawatts of new renewable energy is just the beginning, and that's just in the United States. So what I want to leave you with is that research becoming something that's actionable is the key to us moving forward and fighting the climate crisis. When I did my PhD, I wrote a 400-page document, and literally 3 people read it. We need to end that. We need to end work being done and sitting on a shelf. So that is exactly why taking research and turning it into action is key here, because you can have solutions from the music industry all the way through energy innovation. And that's what I would say is my climate story. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Shinari Freeman, Executive Chef of Cadence and Ubuntu, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Kate Crater.
Shinari, it's kind of amazing to see you because I think an hour ago you were wearing chef's whites. Is that right?
That's right. I just finished prepping.
Yay! Shinari has an awesome dinner tomorrow at Communion. So if anyone doesn't have plans on Friday night, you should go see her in action because this is an excellent opportunity for the West Coast of Seattle.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Shinari, we have a big topic. We're going to talk about the future of food. So there is a lot. But let's start a little smaller. Can you tell everyone about your background?
Yes. So originally I am from Richmond, Virginia. So I went to college in Washington, D.C. at Howard University. During that time, I worked in restaurants, everything from back of house, front of house, management. I've opened a couple of restaurants with different restaurant groups. And eventually I transitioned to a plant-based vegan diet. During this time, I started experimenting a little bit, cooking, seeing if people like my palate and my flavors and food I was putting out, which later prompted me to relocate to New York, attend the Institute of Culinary Education for their health supportive culinary arts program. During that time, there was a pandemic in the middle of my program, but I also got an offer to open up Cadence, which is a vegan Southern soul food restaurant in New York City during the pandemic as well. So fast forward, I have Cadence, and then I also have Ubuntu in Los Angeles, which is a vegan West African inspired restaurant. That's the short version.
That's good, yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, I actually want to talk a little bit about sourcing, and your sourcing, like I think in Los Angeles, it's probably maybe easier. Everyone thinks it's easier. Can you talk about how challenging it is to source ingredients for vegan soul food, which is in itself something that's like really exciting for the world?
Yeah, so I'll touch on both restaurants a little bit because we do have different cuisines and we are offering different things. So in New York, we do sourcing pretty much local. There's a lot of different farms and outlets that kind of help us source the food that we're looking for in New York. So it's a little bit easier. And then we're getting a lot of different produce that is seasonal. So we're kind of creating a menu that reflects the sourcing pretty much. And then for LA, we are doing West African food, so it's a little bit harder sourcing some things. I am fortunate enough to have chef friends in the industry that have different companies which are actually sourcing ingredients straight from Africa. So I'm fortunate enough to be supportive of chef friends, but also people that are helping get these products to the States from the US. So I'm kind of, I don't want to say cutting out the middle person, but it's much easier to go this route because I know directly where my things are coming from, and I know that I get to support friends that I want to support and not just some big corporation. Also, LA is a very sunny place, so there is an abundance of produce all year long, whereas I feel like New York, it is a bit more seasonal, but you can find most things in California throughout the year.
So with starting, I mean, I think both of those concepts are so great and so important for both cities. But I remember when Cadence opened, it really seemed like this revolutionary, like something you were like, oh my gosh, wow, yeah. Like vegan, because so much soul food has a meat-centric plate.
Yeah.
So has it been hard, or how do you put vegetables at the center of the plate for a kind of cuisine that I think most people would think, oh, it's barbecue, it's fried chicken, big pile of it.
Yeah. So definitely with Cadence and all of my cooking, I want to introduce people that are trying my food or people that may have different stereotypes or views about vegan and plant-based eating. I want to introduce them to something that it's real, it's flavorful. We're not using like fake processed meats or anything like that. And I want people to actually enjoy vegetables and fruits and nuts and berries for what they are. I think that a lot of time, especially in restaurants and the food industry, these things are overlooked. So it was really important for me to develop concepts that are bringing vegetables to the forefront. As you mentioned, a lot of Southern soul food is very meat forward, but it wasn't always like this. You know, if you're looking at the history of Southern food, soul food, or any food of the diaspora, we couldn't really afford meat. It was something that, you know, you may have once a week, or, you know, if someone got a promotion or something, like meat was something that was more of a special occasion, but we've gotten so far from that. And I just wanted to kind of bring that back to people's attention, like, hey, vegetables aren't new and they're not going anywhere. I think they just need a bit more appreciation. So I do that at the restaurants.
So you should say, I've gone on the record saying that you make the best potato salad I've ever had.
I'm going to
True
stand by
story.
it. Yeah, I do. I do. And it's vegan.
And it's vegan. But say what some of the other dishes you have that are like the star of the show at both Cadence and Ubuntu.
So Cadence, the biggest star is our Southern fried lasagna. That's right, fried lasagna. Most people probably have never had that before, so I'm very excited to be innovative in my field and, you know, create something exciting for people that are curious about vegan eating, people that have been only offered salads for most of their dining out experiences. I really wanted to take all of those things into consideration when developing a concept. We also have, you know, a spin on chicken and waffles where we're doing like oyster mushrooms and waffles. We have a delicious buttermilk vegan cornbread where we're using seasonal jams, including my grandma's, one of my favorite recipes from my grandmother, which is a peach cardamom jam. So a lot of family recipes for the Cadence New York restaurant. And then for LA, we are doing West African cuisine. So we're pulling inspiration from Senegal, Nigeria, Ghana, places that I visit and I still go and kind of study and work with different chefs to understand ingredients. I have a funny story about that. Maybe I'll mention later. But our star of our LA restaurant would be our jollof rice arancini. I think most people that are interested in West African cuisine may have tried or heard of jollof rice. Oh, okay. I have a represent. So instead of just a traditional rice, we've taken that and applied an Italian technique with the arancini. On top of that, we do that with a side of tremola sauce. So it's a really exciting way to, one, try West African food, perhaps, especially in LA. A lot of people, they've never had West African cuisine because we're so far from West Africa. And it's also a treat for people eating vegan food.
Yeah. That sounds delicious, and now I'm hungry.
Okay. we can solve
brought
that.
some samples. Will you talk a little bit about some of the innovations that you're seeing and you want to see in kitchens, both professional and home?
There are so many. One of my favorite examples would definitely be with what New York food scene is doing when it comes to vegan, sustainability, and plant-forward restaurants. You're not just getting the mom and pop shops, absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're not just getting places where there's like a salad bar or like a hot bar. You're getting full-blown fine dining vegan restaurants. And I think New York is really taking the lead with that. And you're seeing a lot of chefs get creative, myself included, a part of this wave. But there's been people before me doing it much, much longer. So I'm really inspired by them. And I think one of the most exciting things that I've seen in the past few years is 11 Madison Park actually transitioning to a vegan, plant-based menu. And this is one of the top restaurants in the world.
Literally,
so, you know, these are leaders in our food and culinary industry, and, you know, I'm really excited to be cooking during this era. But I think as time goes on and as we pay more attention to sustainability and what we can be doing in our individual restaurants and concepts, people will kind of start to understand the importance of having a more sustainable concept.
I love to think about that. Now, in terms of like some of the big challenges that we're facing, everyone's facing, but you're sort of on the front line of it in a kitchen, what are some of the problems that you're most concerned about? Like, is food waste something that you have thoughts about?
You know, I actually don't really have much food waste. I think that there's just so many different ways to avoid it, and I think that if people stop making the excuses and start actually taking the time to kind of invest in it and implement these programs within your restaurant, you can avoid a lot of food waste. Some things that we do at both of the restaurants, we make sure that if we have any additional food, a lot of times we are offering it to local organizations where we can help feed our community. I've done like many events, and in New York there's like a park by the restaurant. There's a lot of unhoused people there, so we make sure to take food to the unhoused people in the neighborhood. You can do things like family meals, and I'm also a part of a restaurant group. So we have about 10 to 13 different restaurants within a 3-block radius in New York. So a lot of times, hey, these eggplants are going to go bad in about like a couple of days. Do you guys need eggplants? Do you guys want to do an eggplant special? So really it's just communicating, right? There's other things that people can do first in, first out. I hope most restaurants are doing this, whereas you have new produce and orders coming in, but you want to make sure that you're using things during the right time span so that nothing goes to waste. And then also I find that implementing certain ingredients into multiple dishes helps prevent waste as well. So that's something that we like to do at both of the restaurants to make sure that we're kind of like ahead of the game. But I've never really experienced waste because why? Like, why do we need waste? Like, there's so many ways to prevent it.
Preach.
You know? Yeah, I don't know.
Right. Will you say an example, though, of like an ingredient that you use in multiple ways in either of your kitchens, both of your kitchens?
Yes. So let me see. I would say something like tomatoes. Like in New York, we have the fried lasagna, so we're putting tomatoes into the bolognese sauce, we're putting tomatoes into the tomato sauce. We also make fried green tomatoes. We make different sauces with like a tomato base, like we might make ketchup. We're not wasting any tomatoes. Like they're not being wasted. Something else that may be popular, you have onions, mushrooms, things that you can put into a stock. So that's just another example of how you can kind of repurpose these ingredients versus just throwing them away, because I mean there's just too much waste going on. I'm sorry, like it's too much.
That is the truest statement of everything I've heard in the last couple of days. That's what keeps resonating in my world. So if you have extra eggplants, like if your next door restaurant doesn't want them, would you look up a recipe? Would you figure out or go back to your family recipes and figure out what you're going to do with it?
I would, yes. I think that we definitely do it within our restaurant groups, and in LA, it's our only restaurant in LA, but we have made friends with our neighbors. So, you know, the same way that it is in your community, maybe at home, and you might need some sugar or something for an ingredient or a recipe, we do the same thing with our neighbors in our LA restaurants and New York restaurants. But I would always say that there's always something to do with food. Someone's always hungry. You know, not everyone has the privilege or the access to the foods that we have in our restaurants. So if you can't figure out what to do with your food, I'm pretty sure there's someone in need within a very, short mile radius that you can figure something out. But there's many different ways that we try to avoid food waste. And so far, it's been working for the past 3, almost 4 years.
I love it. So you actually talked about 11 Madison Park a little bit ago and the proliferation of vegan restaurants in New York City, which I love to hear. Are you seeing more vegan? Are you seeing more demand for vegan? Are your restaurants more crowded than, I know Cadence was always impossible to get into, and you in fact expanded it. You made it bigger. Are you seeing even more demand from, and from who? Like, are you seeing it across generations or?
I am. I'm seeing a number of vegan restaurants pop up in New York, along with LA as well. I think the timing of us opening both Cadence and Ubuntu was perfect. Granted, we all went through a pandemic, but what this pandemic did is kind of spike the interest and the consciousness about health. Like, what am I putting in my body? Like, what food should I be eating or implementing into my diet? So for us to open a vegan restaurant with soul food where it's such a loved cuisine, but, you know, perhaps people may be wanting to transition their diet a little bit and not miss out on certain foods. So I think the timing of it was perfect. And fortunately enough, I did my research before opening Cadence, and I noticed that there were 0 soul food restaurants that were vegan or vegetable forward in New York, so I knew the timing was perfect. Same thing with Ubuntu in LA. There are 0 West African vegan restaurants, probably in California. I have to check that, but there's definitely none in Los Angeles. So I think the demand for the food that I'm putting out will always be there because I do my research. I'm ahead of the curve, and I know what people want. And I've been in that position, transitioning from eating meat and trying to go vegan. I'm like, I don't want tofu and cauliflower wings. Like, I want some food, you know? So I still have a soft spot for people that are in that position because I've been on both sides of it, both as a chef, as a diner, as a vegan, as a non-vegan. I've kind of seen all different aspects of it, so I try to represent and have my food represent for people interested.
So do you have any new restaurant news to tell us? If you've been on the front line of, you know, exactly what's coming, what's next?
I'm not opening any restaurants right now, if that's what you mean. But wow. In terms of, you know, what other restaurants are doing and what I've been seeing as a chef and a diner, I'm just really excited for the future of vegetables in restaurants. I think more people are starting to add vegan options to their menus and vegetable options. And it's not just salads and French fries. We're actually getting some good creative stuff out here, which I appreciate. I think that, you know, it's important for some of these more well-known chefs to kind of lead that wave, right? Because they have that audience, they have the eyes of the world looking at them. So I really do applaud people like 11 Madison Park for making that change. But I'm just really excited to see what our food industry is going to be like in the next couple of years.
Well, you're really part of making that happen. So Shinari, thank you so much.
Thank you. That's it.
Please welcome to the stage Joshua Amponsem, Strategy Director of the Youth Climate Justice Fund, and Heather McTeer-Toney, Executive Director of Beyond Petrochemicals, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Sharon Chen.
Heather, Joshua, it's just so good to have you both here. The name of the session is Galvanizing Community Climate Action. We know climate change is a global problem, but it's also an extremely local one. And both of you have been such powerful advocates for your local communities and for communities that are often overlooked. As you've both argued, there is no one-size-fits-all solution to the climate problem, to transition, to adaptation, and it all has to be done in consultation with people on the ground who will be impacted most. Heather, Beyond Petrochemicals is working with support from Bloomberg Philanthropies to block the expansion of more than 120 proposed petrochemical and plastics projects in the US. Of course, stopping these projects will have a major impact on planet warming emissions that will go into the atmosphere, but you've also framed it as a health issue, as an issue that will help clean up the air, clean up the water, and keep communities safe for people. Is there a reason that you've chosen to frame it that way, and do you find that more effective?
Well, first, thank you for that question, and thank you for hosting this conversation here at such an important time. I think it's imperative that we realize we are not going to solve climate change by creating more plastic. So when we start with that, I think it's also equally for us to understand where the plastic's coming from and what it is. Petrochemicals are what plastics are made of, but the majority of petrochemical plants that are proposed in the United States of America are proposed in communities of color. They are proposed in communities that are already overburdened by air pollution and by toxic chemicals. So petrochemicals, they're really a triple threat because they're a threat to our environment, they are a threat to climate progress, and they are a threat to public health. So imagine this, you're in a community, and in this community you're surrounded by facilities that are already for generations putting out more and more toxic pollution every single day. You've grown up in this environment. And in the same environment, you're dealing with poverty, education, health disparities. All of these have a cumulative impact, and then at the same time you hear that they're going to build another plant right down the street. We have to understand that in order to stop this expansion of petrochemical, it comes through local people and local action, which is why Bloomberg Philanthropies is so spectacular, I think, in seeing that and going directly to say, how do we partner and work with local organizations and communities? But also the data and the research that's necessary, that's missing, being able to add to that just helps us see it so much clearly and really support people on the ground in what they've been trying to do for years.
Yeah, that's great. And Joshua, you're a huge advocate for developing countries and for the youth who live there. A big part of your job is bridging the gap between what local communities need and what's needed at the highest level, at COP, at the United Nations global talks every year, and you know how you bring the needs of what people on the ground need to this big forum where decisions are actually made. And one thing that you've spoken about is adaptation, and how these communities, they are the most vulnerable to more extreme weather, and yet they are the least equipped to deal with it. And this year at COP, again, you know, it's going to be a struggle to really get that on the agenda and get people talking about it and finally getting some money flowing. I mean, how do you look at this conversation and how you can push the issue forward?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the work that you do. When I started my climate journey, one of the things that we wanted to do was to go to communities and talk to communities about climate. And I was a student at that time in my undergrad. We went to communities and realized that, no, there's nothing to tell them actually, because they are very much aware of what is happening. But the word climate itself was not translating to them. What was translating to them was waste. It was right on their doorsteps, and those who were impacted the most were the ones who were being left behind when it comes to even waste management systems. And how do we talk to those communities and bring their cases to the big platforms like COP? At the same time, you have, you know, an intergovernmental system that says that everything environment sits with the UN Environment Program. Everything climate sits with the UNFCCC, which is the UN Climate Secretariat. So there's already a gap in how you represent those communities in the climate conversation. And it took years to be able to bridge that gap and even have plastics as a conversation in the climate space, and to have a system where organic waste, which generates a lot of methane as well, even a conversation at that level. But who are the people who made this possible? It was local communities. The big corporates, the big companies, even governments at the international level were not talking about these issues. It took grassroots organizations, youth-led organizations at that local level, creating examples of how dealing with issues like that, because you won't solve the climate crisis by working on climate. And I want to repeat that again, because climate is not climate in itself. It is health, it is food, it is poverty. It's every inequality that we see and injustice we see in society that is being just left, and now we're just creating new terminologies and galvanizing around that. So when we think of local communities, the work that they do in making and improving their lives, that is climate action. And that is why the Youth Climate Justice Fund, we decided that we will set up a fund that will focus on providing financing to youth-led organizations and grassroots organizations that are historically underfunded, working at the community level and supporting their work. Because by doing that intersectional work at the community level, that is solving the climate crisis. And I work at the UN with the Secretary General's office leading the climate program there, looking at the youth and climate. And I've been to COP for the past 10 years. And if I look at everything I've gone through that process, I was like, you know what? This is not going to deliver climate action and climate justice to my community. And there have to be a new way of really providing the financing that is so needed to support local communities, and realizing that a lot of the conversations we are around carbon reduction and carbon and mitigation and carbon, because it's easy to measure, it's mathematics. But when you talk about adaptation and resilience, it's not that simple to measure that. It's about livelihood. It's about protecting people's life. And you can put a dollar sign on that. And yet, a lot of foundations, philanthropy, a lot of businesses and corporate wanted to put all their funding into how do we reduce this gigaton of CO2. But it's not always going to be about that. And it's about how do we create a future that people can pursue the lives that they were born, they dreamt of, and they can achieve that, and not be left to something that they did not create, but they have to suffer the impact of that in the future being robbed away from them.
Yeah. And speaking of the future, I mean, there's been so much talk at this festival about the US election and how high the stakes are for climate policy. And, you know, Heather, you work on the ground with a lot of communities, and so much of that is getting them to understand just how crucial it is to go out and vote and make sure that their voices are heard. I mean, how are you conveying that message, and what do you feel is the most effective way for people to get that?
So, Sharon, I started my career as a mayor. Maybe one of the reasons I think Bloomberg is pretty cool. But as a mayor, there's one thing that you learn very, very quickly, and that is all politics are local. I know it's a saying that we toss around casually, but the reality is the place where it hits people first is at home, everything. So when we talk about climate action, it must be integrated into our everyday responsibilities to care for our communities, our children. The kitchen table issues that we talk about are making sure that we take every measure to have some type of action on climate possible, and that includes turning out to vote. So in a conversation with a group of moms, it is talking about making sure that we turn out for every election, that we're empowering people to be there to vote for their mayor, their city council member, their county supervisor, their state legislator, their governor, their congressperson, their senator, and their president, because all of them are important. And I think that the power of our movement right now is that we're able to show that to people, and we're able to empower them to see where their vote is valuable. We must do this more and more. It is not one thing that sits with one organization or one group. We must work together in a collaborative. So all of you out there, everyone, is responsible not for saying, oh, that's what they're supposed to do. That's the job of this organization to turn out the vote. No, it is the responsibility of all of us together as one collective to ensure that people are empowered to action. And that empowerment to action, that turns into how we are stopping the expansion of petrochemical facilities, how we're engaging on a global level to ensure that plastics are talked about and dealt with. It ensures that we're talking about microplastics, and the issues that we're experiencing right now in our health are a predominant issue for all of our agencies, federal or state or otherwise. It starts with empowering people at home, and I'm so excited to be a part of that. Like I said, I started out as a mayor. I can't help it.
I know, I wanted to mention, at 28. It's amazing. And Joshua, you know, in the US, climate is so politicized. There are all these culture wars around green technologies and gas stoves and EVs. And we see that a lot in the developing world, you know, where the fossil fuel industry is so entrenched and people are so attached to these ways of life. But it's quite a different story in the developing world. We've written about solar panels taking over in Nigeria and 2- and 3-wheel electric vehicles taking over in India. And people seem to be much more open-minded towards these green technologies. Like they just want something that's cheaper, that's accessible, that works. I mean, is this your experience? And, you know, how do you feel like there is this opportunity, but it's not being taken advantage of?
I think, first of all, I'll say that solving the climate crisis is probably easier if you do it in a very unequitable way. Now, the struggle we face is that we have to do it right. We cannot repeat everything that have happened in the past, or the colonial things that happen, and the current new colonial ways that development is being done is not right, and we have to change that. And this is why I have big issues when we have these conversations like this, where you know that solar is getting cheaper, which is true, EVs are getting cheaper, which is true, and there are big progress happening in the climate sector. But if you look at the continent where the solar potential is highest the most, 5 times higher, which is Africa, solar is not cheap, right? It's not cheap, and why is that? Because we are not investing in the skills development and the technological development in regions where the solutions are even needed the most. Right? If you look at the research that is going into new climate solutions and even climate technology, the universities in the Global South, in countries where those research are even more impactful, are not getting the research funding. The larger institutions in Europe, in the US, in Global North countries, leveraging the suffering of the Global South and accumulating huge amount of research funding in their universities and pioneering all the authorship to the research that is happening. These are the real issues that we really have to talk about. How do we ensure that we can do this in an equitable way and give leadership, authorship, ownership to people who are really living these experiences every day, that they can own their own solutions? This is so important. So 3 things. A, I think that we really need to focus about how do we build a workforce and the technology and the skills needed in the Global South for just transition. We all know this is like plain truth. All the minerals, all the transition minerals, critical minerals that we need for the EV and the energy transition are all held up, majority in Africa, China, and other developing world. How do we make sure that they get the most benefit out of that, right? We can go and supply energy all across Madagascar. We can take a company from US to do that. The only thing the community will get is electricity. That's not what they need. What they need is the jobs and the income and the profit that come from doing something like that. And we need to keep that in mind. Now, the second thing that I think we really need to focus on is the narrative shift. I think that, we've seen technology leapfrogging in Africa, and that is great. But that is only possible because there was a huge investment that really focused on building solutions that are needed from the continent. Mobile money as a technology wouldn't work probably in any other part of the world as it did in Africa, because we live in an informal settlement, an informal sector, and you needed that kind of transactional method for it to work. And this is why we need to invest in such technologies in those countries and making sure that they have the leadership and the ownership to do that, and really supporting that narrative shift where you don't present people as vulnerable, but really presenting them as people who understand and have in-depth knowledge about their situation and can produce the better solutions for that. Now, the third part, which I find even more important, is that when you look at local communities, they are the first respondents for every crisis that happens. And the biggest leverage we have now as a world is relational capital. When I was growing up and I started my climate movement, if you see something on the news, say, oh, there's hunger in Ethiopia, for many people it's like, oh, it's sad. But you didn't really have a relationship there. You couldn't relate to that. Right now, we have so many relationships around the world, and I think this is one of the biggest leverage we have. How do we build on those relationships, have that empathy, and really push locally within our government to make sure that their own policies in the US, across the world, are really the policies that would allow to drive significant change in countries that are most impacted. If we can do this, we can really drive the change that we need. And then one last thing, which is, they say that the chirping bird, which is an African proverb, the chirping bird is not building its nest, and a roaring lion is not hunting its prey. Enough with the talking. We talk a lot, conference after conference, and every single time. Of course, the networking is great, and we all need it. But I think the most thing that we all need to do is that think about that one thing you can do actively to really drive change for someone. And if that is going out to vote, please go vote. If that is really going on a learning journey to understand the climate context much better for other people in different parts of the world, please do it. But enough with the talking. We need to really take matters into our hands, and we need to act.
Thank you.
We have just 1.5 minutes left, and I wanted to ask both of you a quick question, which is, you deal with such heavy issues every single day, and you're out there doing this work. It's just so important to make sure you fill your own cup. What is the thing that you do that sort of allows you to remember why you're doing this and keep going? Heather?
I am a person of faith and have been all my life. And I think if there's any time that we need hope and faith, it's right now. There's no scenario in which we're able to reduce climate emissions and increase petrochemical pollution. You can't create more plastics and achieve the climate goals that we've established globally. And so my hope, my motivation, my joy comes in the fact that this is a possibility. We can do this. And we're at this moment in innovation and investment to be able to pour into communities to be the leader in that. And I want to be a part of that. I'm excited about it. It means my kids have a great future. And that's what makes me smile and say, yes, let's go do this.
Mine is very simple. I work a lot with young people, and I work with young people in very difficult contexts. And after every major sort of extreme weather event, whether it's a cyclone, whether it's flood, and I'm in touch with young people in the country, and they wake up every day, and they still get out there, and they still do what they do. And I look at them like this level of resilience is just what is really the proof that we can do this. So for me, that is my source of energy. If the people who are really seeing the poverty, the famine, the flood, and the cyclones are getting up every day, and they are going and putting in the hard work, advocating, campaigning, demanding from their government, we all here, we have no excuse. We got to be hopeful, and we got to have faith, and we have to do what is needed.
Yeah. On that note, thank you both so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Antonique Smith, actress and Grammy-nominated singer and writer, and Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr., President and CEO of Hip Hop Caucus, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Kira Bindrum.
Welcome. Thank you both so much for being here. I'm really excited to have this conversation, but I thought we would maybe start with laying some groundwork, because we are here today to talk about activism and culture and climate justice, and I would argue out of those three phrases, there's probably one that's like the least familiar to the average person. So what do we mean when we're talking about climate justice? What is like the definition you would give?
For me, it's what's happening to the world. It's the storms, it's the fires, it's the hurricanes, the tornadoes, the heat, people dying in the streets, and it's fighting against that, and it's fighting for justice for those people who are suffering. I mean, at this point, that's literally all of us. But that's my personal, how I think of climate justice, is fighting against that thing.
That's good. I mean, for me, I'm originally from Louisiana. Nobody clapped for that. Louisiana. And being from Louisiana, it's a place that is called Cancer Alley, because between Baton Rouge to New Orleans, that 85-mile stretch of land, there are more petrochemical, more oil and gas, more toxins that are in that community. And so literally that community, my community, is called Cancer Alley, because people are dying because of emphysema, of asthma, and cancer. And so, and in that, because of the emissions from that affect everybody on this planet, it hits them first and worst, as it does folks in Texas, Ohio River Valley, Ohio, West Virginia, and other places where they have petrochemical facilities. That impacts the climate. It puts the emissions in, it changes the carbon in the atmosphere, it hurts the emissions. But the justice part, that people then know that people know that they're putting these facilities around the most vulnerable in our country. People know that their business plan means a death sentence for my community. People know that. So the justice part comes in from litigation and legislation to hold them accountable, to say that you can't poison people because of what you're doing, and we're going to make you pay, we're going to, if need be, put you in jail, we're going to hold you accountable. And the justice part is the enforcement of that, to enforce the laws on the books. Now, we're in a crisis mode, obviously, from the Supreme Court to local litigation, that it really has us scared.
And with that said, I love that you said that, the justice part. I guess I don't refer to the litigation and that part of the justice, because in my 10 years, so I've been in the movement for 10 years, thanks to Rev Yearwood. I'm a proud Jersey girl, and I was, when we first met, I was there to sing a song on the very first album about climate change, Home, Heal Our Mother Earth, the album Home. And Rev sat me down and said, I need to tell you what's really going on before you do this album, which I really respect, that he wasn't just trying to just get everybody to do their thing and go, that he really wanted people to really understand. And when he started talking, I'm from a proud Jersey girl, And when he started talking about
Pause for
Superstorm-
Jersey, come on.
Right?
Yeah. Jeez.
Okay, thank you.
And he said you twice and nobody clapped.
Right?
I said it once and kind of clapped.
So yeah, so he was telling me about Superstorm Sandy and how that was connected to climate change and how 60% of African Americans live within 30 miles of a power plant. And it started to really hit home because my family lived within, some of them 5 miles of a power plant. And I remember this incredibly smelly power plant on the turnpike in New Jersey. And when he made it hit home for me, and in my 10 years, the reason why I'm bringing this up now after what he just said, which was so true, I don't hear so much about that part of the justice, and so that's why I don't necessarily refer to it. But that is important, and that's partly why we're all fighting. There's definitely a good group of people who need to be in jail and things like that for what's going on to people in our country.
I want to zig a little bit. I'm sure everyone here in the audience has felt, as I've felt, and been impressed by my colleagues' very earnest attempts to get anyone to say anything about Biden. And these questions have been going to people who have been close to the administrations or who have been in politics in some capacity. And it strikes me that both of you have been doing this for a really long time and have worked with and around multiple administrations from different parties. And I think there's an undertone in the questions being asked today, which is not a knock, but there's a sense of dread. There's a sense of what happens in the next few weeks is incredibly important to the future of the country and the world, and certainly what happens in the next 4 years. And it's hard not to feel that, but also I'm just curious, with the grand time scale that you both have worked in, how do you feel about this? Not necessarily whether you think Biden should be the candidate, that's not the question, but how do you feel about the stakes of what plays out and the importance of who's in charge, I guess?
Well, no, I can speak to that. I mean, first and foremost, I think that anyone who says they are a climate change denier and is running for public office, that should be disqualifying off the bat. You should not be allowed to run for office when something is impacting so many people, humans, that then you're showing yourself not actually dealing with the reality, and you shouldn't be in that position. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that if you are in public office, that we do not need people and politicians to be climate champions on Monday and then pushing false solutions on Wednesday. You can't be talking about, renewable energy on Monday, then you're talking about fracking on Tuesday. That just doesn't work. And so we can't have this lukewarm approach, and we've seen that. And so people are really, we are in a climate crisis. Let me just make sure people understand. We need a climate emergency to be declared so that people can understand what is happening. As we are sitting here, there are wildfires that are literally going on up and down the West Coast. As we're sitting here in Phoenix and in Las Vegas and New Delhi, the temperature in some cases was 125 degrees. And the pavement was registering at 160 degrees. In India, there are children this past week who are 3- and 4-year-olds who literally drowned themselves because they were putting themselves in a bucket to hide from the heat. There were people who were in Mecca who were going to go for their religion, and they were dying in the thousands. We have hurricanes that we've never seen before in June that are registering at Category 5, that are literally going in circles and decimating the Caribbean. We are in a crisis, and so the time for this playing with this is over. And so we need somebody to understand that there are people who literally were alive in June but are now dead in July because of this climate madness. And we need them to hold people accountable. So, with that being said, I know that there's a lot going on the political framework. I understand that. But this is what I want to say to every single climate activist, or even those who don't even understand what's going on. Whatever happens in this country, I know there's people watch around the world, but in this country, in America, whatever happens on November 5th, whatever happens, please declare to yourself right now that you will get up on the 6th, no matter who wins, and you will fight like hell to stop this climate madness.
our work that we have with Beyond Petrochemicals, you just saw from the amazing Hesme Tertoni, you heard yesterday from Anthony Williams and many others, it's kind of a testament because we're in a state in Louisiana and Texas where it ain't easy. It ain't the most friendly place, litigation legislation, but what we have seen that the folks on the front lines are not giving up. Ms. Sharon Levine in St. James Parish, Rosetta Ozane up there with Vessel Project, Dr. Beverly Wright in New Orleans, particularly black women who are saying that we are not going to stop fighting. So if they don't stop fighting, we ain't gonna stop fighting.
I want to make sure we talk about storytelling a bit, which I know is so important to you both, and not to default to my what is questions, but I do, it's a word we've heard a lot over the last few days, and I do think that's merit in stepping back and saying, what does that mean to you guys? What is storytelling? How does that manifest in the world? What should we be thinking about?
Well, I am a storyteller. I'm an actor, I'm a singer, and I call myself an artivist because that is how I express my artivism, is through my art. I think storytelling, and it's many different forms of storytelling, honestly. And I think in this case, we need every single type of storytelling there is possible. This is an all hands on deck moment. We have so many hearts to change. Half the country thinks the whole thing is a hoax. So there are at least half this country that we have to literally change. Then there's others who do believe in it, but they're kind of like, oh, well, I don't know, it's nothing we can do. These are natural disasters, even though, and I think that's another part of the storytelling, is that people need to understand that there is an actual culprit, there is there's an entity, a group of people who are putting profits way above all of our lives and all of our health. That is the main thing that we can actually be fighting against. And storytelling is so important because I like to say the word art is in the word heart. And art touches hearts in a way that nothing else really can. We have a love problem in our world. I think just everything that's going on is a lack of love. Profits over people is a lack of love. And so, art changes the heart, art touches the heart, art moves the heart, it heals the heart, it uplifts the heart, and we can inform people and change their hearts with storytelling, all the forms. And when I say all the forms, I mean we need everybody. We need all the superstars, singers, we need Beyonce and Taylor Swift and all of them to do some songs. We need, people to make more movies. And, environmental justice, we need a variety of stories to be told. There's a lot of we've seen really incredible doomsday material done, and we need to tell the story so that everybody can hear the message in all the ways that it can possibly be told, including comedy.
So one of the things there in the storytelling, so I've been in the movement for a long time, a very long time, my Lord. I've been around from when we were fighting against the Keystone XL pipeline, to the Mountain Valley Pipeline, to the Mahalia Pipeline, Line 6, Line 3. You name a pipeline, I fought against it. Standing Rock, we've been every single fight I've been, from the divestiture movement, helped from the beginning, so many movements. So I get the demonstration part. Been arrested in front of the White House from both Republican and Democrat presidents, and they will arrest you both the same. And I have been around with amazing groups like Earth Justice, groups as far as litigation, and I understand shaping policy. If you don't shape policy, policy shapes you. So I understand litigation, legislation, demonstration. Working with Bloomberg, we understand research and data. It's actually one of the most amazing things that happens there. But in this moment, the fossil fuel industry puts millions and billions of dollars into telling their false narrative. And they do that in a relentless fashion. And talking points and little gimmicky commercials, our own white papers are not going to do it. We must be intentional about media. I'm so glad for groups like Good Energy, Hip Caucus, the Norman Lear Center, the USC School of Film. There's so many different groups right now talking about this that it's critical for us now to know that almost the last line of defense is demonstration, and demonstration through production. That we must now create and tell the story, because the reality is this. We know that Black, brown, and indigenous communities are saying that climate is a huge issue for them. We know that the issue that people are saying that they don't understand the climate crisis. We know that they're now 15%. We know that from the first Earth Day to now, in an amazing fashion, the Pew Research study said that 80% of Americans back then were saying they were environmentalists. That's now 41%. So literally we're going down because we're not telling our story. We're telling our stories to each other. We're in these spaces to, as I say, preach to the choir, but we're not telling our story to the world. And we're also letting the world tell their story, which means that we're telling it only from this aspect of America, but not telling it. So I think that, honestly, the most important thing that we can invest in to save humanity will come from narrative storytelling to ensure that humans can somehow have clean air and clean water.
Yes.
Impossible to disagree with that. I would say, I feel like there are probably a lot of people, maybe even a lot of people here, who feel like they're engaged in that work day to day, and that sometimes it can feel like shouting into the void. And you have this fascinating problem in climate change where even if we just talk about the people who believe in it, they don't want to think about it. And you really just kind of want to blinders on, or at least like spend a significant amount of your time not thinking about it. And so I'm curious, from both of your work, what have you found, and you mentioned comedy as one, like what have you found is effective at telling this particular story or getting this message across, where it's not necessarily an issue of awareness, though I think in some capacity it can be, but it's like penetration. It's really just getting people to engage with this idea.
Well, at the Hip Hop Caucus, who I work with as well, is amazing. They have a couple of documentaries that are out, underwater projects. They do a number of things in that regard. But to your point, I think that what I'm saying here is that folks in this room, from the tech side, the business side, from the science side, we need you, but we need other folks who are experts to tell the story. You're not, listen, I taught at Georgetown for a little bit, and I've been around a lot of scientists, and if I ever want to go to sleep sometimes, I call my friends together, and we have a conversation, and then I'm laid out. Nothing against my scientist friends, but I'm just saying that there are experts who can tell stories better, and we need to enlist them. And what works, we've seen now, is like the beasts of the southern wild. Like, we've seen stories that can captivate us and move us, and also stories that don't just tell it from our talking points, but tell it from a way that can help us to move forward.
And I sing. I like to actually tell stories. I've been on many toxic tours around the country, and I like to share some of those actual stories of people who I was able to touch and see what they were going through. Little girls, you know, living 25 feet away from an oil drilling site in LA, and she has now beat cancer at like age 18, 19, which is crazy. And I tell those kind of stories, and then I sing, and the message then just kind of seeps into the heart because I'm pairing a story with music. So that's my personal form. But yes, we need all the forms. We need them all right now.
And we have data that backs it up, that shows how storytelling can move the zeitgeist, how stories change it. And again, I'm not saying that none of the sectors are important. They're all important. What I'm saying right now, that we are losing the battle as far as narrative and storytelling, and it's making your job much harder. That's the key thing. And this is a battle that we can't lose, not only for us, but for future generations who deserve clean air and clean water in 2124, 100 years from now.
Somehow we are at time. I could talk to both of you for 6,000 hours. Thank you so much for being here and for the work that you're doing, and it's been great having you.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Jonathan Foer, author, and Liev Schreiber, actor, writer, and director.
Hello. Can everybody hear? Hi. Okay. Thank you for having us. Thank you to Bloomberg Green. Thank you for coming to this event. I've known Liev for about 25 years. And we have been close friends, best friends, pretty much ever since we met. And he's my favorite person in the world to have difficult conversations with. And so I have been looking forward to this opportunity because we're going to talk about, as every speaker today talked about, a very difficult subject. I wanted to start by asking you to share with the audience a feeling that you described to me. This was, I guess, a week or two ago. You were in Riyadh to see Alexander Usyk fight for the heavyweight championship. And you said at the time that you found yourself overwhelmed by the sense that he was going to win that fight. You had faith in his ability to do so and that he was the good guy. And yet, immediately after the fight, you had a kind of opposite side of the coin feeling that the good guy, broadly speaking, is not going to win. I've found myself continuing to think about that quite a bit since you told it to me. Can you open it up a bit for everybody here?
You've kind of sanitized the story a little bit, because what I told you was that I had this 3-week period of depression after Usyk won the undisputed heavyweight title. And just to establish some things about Usyk, he's this incredibly, he's undefeated his entire career. The average fighter has about 40 amateur fights in their portfolio. Alexander Usyk has 330. So he's somebody who lives, breathes, thinks everything boxing, and he's the best in the world. And the guy he's going up against is a 1.5 feet taller and probably 30 or 40 pounds heavier. But I'm convinced that Alexander is going to win because of his talent, because of how he carries himself as a person, that he has this he has respect and dignity and nobility, and also because I am doing a lot of work for Ukraine, and Usyk has come to mean something to me. And I was very nervous at the beginning that he wasn't going to win, and that the other guy was too big, and the other guy's a great fighter, but kind of a PR machine. He's all talk and all this other stuff. And so I really was invested in Usyk winning. And he invited me to walk out with him, and I was terrified because I thought, what if I jinx him? This guy's never lost a fight. And what if I go with him and he loses? So it was a scary night. And then he won, and it was this hugely triumphant feeling. My wife and I are screaming and jumping up and down in a Saudi crowd, which is kind of unusual. And the moment he won, I suddenly had this overwhelming feeling of disappointment that the real world wasn't like that. That this sort of empirical person, this empirical fighter, this guy who just practices and works and does it all right, does it by the book, behaves the right way, trains the right way, practice. Of course he's going to win. And for some reason, right after he won, I had this huge sinking feeling about how ironic it is that it isn't like that in real life. how awful it was. And I guess I was thinking primarily of the situation in Ukraine. And that, you know, because I've been working on it for 2 years, really has stayed with me pretty much for the past 3 weeks or a month. And a very powerful feeling.
As I said, it really resonated with me when you described it, and it's something that I have felt increasingly over the last few years, that it's just overwhelming. You know, the problems of the world are overwhelming. Climate change is overwhelming.
Right.
The situation in Ukraine is overwhelming. The threats to democracy are overwhelming. And so, and not only overwhelming in terms of scale, but overwhelming in terms of a kind of vagueness and a distance and not knowing my own relationship or how to participate. And that alienation or that feeling of smallness often leads me to sort of recede, to say, I don't, this is too big, it's too much, it feels too dire, the good guys are going to lose, so I'm going to kind of watch from the sidelines and occasionally say the right thing when it's asked of me. But then you told me this other story.
But that's not what you've done, by the way.
Well,
and I should say that I was invited to this, and I think I was invited because I've done a few things on climate, but primarily probably because of the CNN show that I've been hosting. And I called them back and I said, I don't know anyone who speaks more articulately or whose heart is deeper in this subject than Jonathan. Would you guys consider having us as a conversation? So that's sort of how this happened, just as some context.
As a favor, would you allow my friend to share this? Yeah.
So I never paid him for our wedding. He was the minister at the wedding. So I thought, I'll get you that gig at Bloomberg. Let's see how.
So there's this other story that you've told me recently that I think of as a kind of counterpoint to the boxing despair.
Yeah.
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I'm curious what you think, and that's the story of cleaning up the beach in Montauk.
That's really all it is my wife suggested that we do beach cleanups as kind of a weekly thing with the kids. And I think that was, probably 7 years ago we started doing that. And it was this kind of triumphant feeling that I was doing something, that I was engaged. And I think it's part of what probably led to developing Blue Check and some other things, this idea that on this very sort of selfish and individual level, I could model something for my kids, that made me feel better. And also, it was also a great consequence that my beach looked better, and I felt engaged with the ocean, and I felt engaged with my environment. And I think sometimes when I feel overwhelmed by things or that they're too big for me to figure out how to participate, it's those little actions sometimes that really help make me feel connected.
Yeah, it seems like both stories have to do with power in a way, or participation. You know, in the case of the boxing match, he's literally the most powerful fighter, the most powerful person by one definition on the planet, who's engaging in a contest which is going to have a clear winner or loser. The beach cleanup is, you know, as small an act of civic responsibility as they come, worthwhile as it is, and more than I often do. But it's a tiny act, and one that, like most tiny acts, can leave one feeling unsure of what the ultimate meaning is. You know, like climate change has so very many moving parts. It's such a simple problem in certain ways, but it's such a complicated problem in other ways. As an individual facing it and questioning what role we might have, it feels overwhelmingly complicated. And if I get an electric car, if I become a vegetarian, if I limit the number of children I have to 2, whatever it is, to what extent is that going to matter in the sense of an overall victory or defeat? I think these ideas might come together in a paper that you shared with me recently. you made me aware of the concept of planetary boundaries, developed by Johan Rockström, among others. And it creates a framework of 9 areas that describe these thresholds of human activities on the Earth systems beyond which the Earth can no longer function properly or regulate itself. I've known you for many years. I've known you for many years since climate change was at the center of our sort of collective consciousness, and it's the first thing you've ever shared with me, frankly, on the subject. I was curious, what was it about that you were responding to and that you thought I would respond to?
I'm someone who likes instructions. I like manuals. I read, my family makes fun of me because I read all of the manuals. And I think the story about Usyk for me is about somebody who, for some reason, I see as an empirical truth. And it should matter. Like Usyk is the scientist to me. And that's why he's successful. Because he respects the science of the sport. And I think Johan Rockström, amongst many other climate scientists, is a similar sort of figure. And what he's accomplished with the planetary boundaries is, and part of what Jonathan and I, when we first started to talking about this, is that rather than throwing data and facts at people, we wanted to talk about the feeling of responding to this problem and how do we deal with that feeling. So it was this idea that we would have a very open conversation about it. But what helps me with my extensive ADHD and anxiety and everything else in responding to things that are overwhelming are guidelines. And what I loved about the planetary boundaries and the Potsdam Institute and Johan's work is that they define 9 interrelated systems that we can look at to understand how and when we need to seriously deal with some of these issues. Now, we're over 6 of those limits, so it's pretty serious. And I recommend, if anyone wants, there's a terrific documentary called Breaking Boundaries, which is about Johan Rockström's work on Netflix. But what it gave me was a way to encapsulate the problem, a way to think about it, and to think about what area I can participate in or what piece of this puzzle makes sense to me and I can try to address in my own life. And I found that thing that you were talking about, which is when something becomes overwhelming and you kind of turn and face the wall or apathy sets in. Simplification and just being able to understand context really helped me a lot. I think another thing that Jean Olwang from Virgin United, who's one of the people involved in the Planetary Guardians, said to me that really moved me at the time was the idea of optimism. And where she made that point was she brought up the Montreal Protocol. And when we become so overwhelmed by all of the information that we're getting about climate and our planet and everything else, it's very easy to do exactly what you're saying, which is to retreat into apathy. But then you hear these incredible stories. For instance, that the scientists who identified the problem with CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, and the hole in our ozone. I mean, a hole in the ozone seems like a pretty insurmountable, overwhelming problem. But that within 2 years, we had ratified, sort of universally ratified, the Montreal Protocol, which was, by the way, spearheaded by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, who you don't exactly think of as the world's most effective climate warriors, but sure enough. And within 3 years, we had completely reduced that hole, closed it up, and we made this huge improvement in this seemingly galactic problem. And so I like to keep that in mind. And I think that was what hurt so much about Usyk, even though he won. It was that I had been the only person in my crew who carried that flame of optimism for Ukraine. I had been the one beating the drum going, I know these people, they're going to win. They're going to win. It doesn't matter. The odds don't matter. They're going to win. So on that night, I kind of had that feeling that, like, empirical truths don't matter. Misinformation, disinformation, all of the shit that's sort of driving our culture in these things have got us all spun. And that was, I think, the haze. Coming out of it, though. I mean,
one of the things that I found compelling about the planetary boundaries was it offered a way not only to think about how to care for the planet, but also is a kind of metaphor for how to be a person in the world right now. And this comes back to that feeling we were discussing at the beginning about being overwhelmed. There's so many problems. They're so vast. We are not experts. That's one of the things you and I spoke about in advance of today. Like, we don't want to pretend to be experts, which has a wisdom, obviously, but it can also be an excuse, you know, to say nothing, to do nothing. So one of our most frequent topics of conversation is the proliferation of identities that we each have. We are fathers, we are artists, we are Americans, New Yorkers. There's a long list. And oftentimes those identities are in harmony. Sometimes those identities are in conflict. Sometimes one of those identities will ask something especially large of us. Sometimes it will ask more than we are able to give. And there really is a sense in which, as I was thinking about the planetary guidelines, that, you know, our lives are also ecosystems that require a sort of balance, self-regulation. You are an extraordinarily busy person with many, many demands, and you're somebody who is, your eyes are wide open to the world, and you have a sensitivity to the world. So how do you strike those balances? And is there anything, did you have any kind of like similar reaction that I did to that concept of planetary guidelines, taking it as a personal guidance? Boundaries.
The identities thing, I mean, I'm in the identities business, right? Because I play characters, and in many ways, my life has thankfully been that, is a series of opportunities to explore character and who I am. And there's this very selfish, sort of narcissistic part of me that likes the identity of teaching my kids to respect nature and that they have a sense of stewardship and responsibility towards it. I like that I feel that way, and I get something from that. I get something from teaching them or showing them that compassion is kind of an essential part of who we are as human beings, or, you know, at least in our family, I hope that they have that feeling. So that part of it is selfish, but I also think it's a motivator. Like, I lean into it. I like I like thinking that my kids are understanding that. I think in terms of the planetary boundaries, what they're trying to do with that right now is to get that through the Security Council, the highest level of governance that they can, so that it functions in the sort of the same way that the Montreal Protocol did. But what I related to with the planetary boundaries was this thing about bits, you know, like taking on little bits. And we had a really interesting conversation about this when we first started talking about it, about how it was a lot like maintaining your health. You know, you had all different kinds of doctors. You know, you have the cardiologist, you have the proctologist, you have the dermatologist, and in a funny way, it actually made it easier to tackle everything that's going wrong. Holistically, it's almost too much, but if I could just deal with the hemorrhoids, I'd be okay.
Well, it's like they say nobody dies of old age.
Until they tell me about the heart.
Right.
And then I deal with the heart. But I focus on the heart until they tell me about the skin cancer. And then I forget about the heart and the hemorrhoids and I think about the skin cancer. And that's just because I'm a human being. I don't have the capacity for all of that. I don't have that range of thought or wisdom or energy. I need to break it down. And I really appreciate Johan Rockström's work because it really makes it very clear.
So there is also a risk in breaking things down into pieces that are too small, right? Feeling like satisfied with gestures that are creating feelings that are larger than their actual impact. It's naive to say if we each do our small part, we're going to save the planet. We also need legislative change. We need corporate change, systemic change. At the same time, we know that we can't save the planet without changing as individuals. We will never reach the goals, for example, of the Paris Climate Accords if we continue to eat as we have been eating, the amount of meat and the kinds of meat that we have been eating. And then there's also the element of the things that we do as individuals are not exactly done as individuals. So when I am in a restaurant and I ask the waiter, what's the vegetarian option tonight? The person I'm sitting across from the table from hears me ask that question, is presumably at least a little bit curious. The waiter obviously hears me ask that question and takes note of it. It drip by drip reaches the chef, it reaches the person who's buying the food for the restaurant, it reaches the farmers. When you clean up litter on the beach, you are doing...
Or write a book about factory farming.
Or write a book about factory farming. Yeah. When you clean up litter on the beach, it's a small act, but it's a small act that is witnessed. And it's a small act that inspires. And we live in a moment, for better or for worse, usually for worse, where our choices have never been as recorded and shared.
Right.
So if I have a preference, if I decide to become a vegetarian, who's going to know about it? Without my having to tell them. Amazon will know about it. Google will know about it.
Right.
Apple will know about it. Facebook will know about it. So it does offer a little bit of promise, if you want to be like very optimistic about it, that our small actions are actually larger than we might suspect.
Of course they are. Collectively, at the end of that Breaking Boundaries documentary, David Attenborough sort of breaks it down even further and says that of the four simple things that any person can do by reducing their carbon footprint, by eating healthier, they're all positive things, but it's amazing how, if you imagine exponentially, that if everyone takes on one of those things that selfishly fits their lifestyle, what a difference it can make. I really do believe that's the case, and even the awareness.
And activism, caring and acting on one's care is a kind of muscle that gets stronger. Tolstoy famously said, or at least it's attributed to him, if we had no slaughterhouses, we would have no battlefields. I don't suspect that that's true, but what I suspect is true if people were...
Why did Tolstoy say if we have no...
If we could become a civilization...
So if eating red meat makes us angry.
If we could become a civilization that was thoughtful about suffering broadly, we would be less likely to incur violence against each other.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And,
I missed that one completely.
So I doubt that that's...
This is why we're friends.
Yeah. One thing I hear people say all the time is, if I have to think about that, then I'm going to have to think about that. Like, oh my God, now they're telling me I can't use plastic straws. If I can't use plastic straws, I'm already thinking about my car. I'm already thinking about air travel. I'm already, as if it never stops.
I'm thinking about how much I miss plastic straws. But I don't. I use the seaweed ones.
No.
I don't like the ones you have to wash with the pipe cleaner.
Yeah, I don't like the ones that disintegrate in your mouth, that aren't made for liquids.
Those are the cheap seaweed straws.
It makes no sense
at
all.
Either.
So,
yeah, get us out of straws.
Get us out of straws. Okay, we actually, our time is clicking away. Let's talk about hope, because that is something that I find myself vacillating about pretty dramatically. I could wake up feeling full of hope when I watched the previous panelists.
Yep, they were.
I felt full of hope.
Yeah,
a reminder that there are such smart young people so thoroughly devoted to the problems that we share.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel hopeful, and there are so many reasons to feel despair as well. And I've also grown sort of suspicious of hope, or at least recognize how it's a double-edged sword.
Well, we're getting older.
We're getting older.
Yeah, it's kind of hope-killing,
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But I agree, and listening to the last panel, but for me, it's science. That's our hope. That's our hope, is science, empirical data. And it's like that's what did it in 1989 with the Montreal Protocol. We trusted the scientists. We listened to them. They told us there was a big problem, and our leaders reacted. Things have shifted a little bit, and so hope is a little scary. But I still have faith in that process. I have faith in science.
I have perfect faith in science, but I don't have faith in our ability to listen to science or to respond to science, especially when it asks things of us. We were speaking at lunch about how some of what's asked of us with respect to the climate actually feels good to participate in. Technology is making it such that a lot of the changes we have to make can actually enhance our lives rather than diminish our lives. But there are some things that we have to do that are just difficult, or at the very least, they're difficult in the beginning.
Like what?
I would say for most people, eating differently is difficult.
Yes.
Otherwise, we would have done it already.
Yes.
Like the science couldn't possibly be more clear about the effects of animal agriculture on the climate.
Right.
And yet, even among climate scientists, it proves to be a very hard thing to respond to. It's not because they're bad people. It's not because they're ignorant. It's because...
And it's probably the single most effective thing we could do as individuals.
Almost certainly the most effective thing we can do as individuals.
I think so.
Yeah. And yet it's hard. And so...
Awful.
We have to find a kind of... it seems to me that, like, hope... We often confuse or conflate hope with kind of inspiration. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel hopeful when I'm sure that people are bright enough, young enough, good enough, energetic enough to tackle these seemingly insurmountable problems. But there's also a component of hope that I think has to be like a forgiveness, like especially self-forgiveness of our own humanity. These are difficult changes that are being asked of us within our families, within ourselves, within our local communities, and so on. And if we don't start by an acknowledgement of how difficult they are,
right?
If we say the science tells us to do this, as an aside, when Eating Animals came out, J.M. Coetzee, the Nobel Prize-winning author, one of my favorite authors, wrote a blurb for it. And he said, "You would have to not have a mind or a heart to read this book and not become a vegetarian." And I thought, I don't actually think that's a great thing to say.
Because it isolates some people.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think that I have a mind and a heart, and I have a very hard time being consistent about my values, acting on my values.
We have the same therapist.
Yeah, it's me.
No, it's not Dave. We're not going to say his name because then we'll never get our times. But one of the things that he always says is, one of the things that he said to me that I always thought was really effective that you just raised is to forgive yourself. Because I think that puts you in the place where you know what to do. To take a moment to stop and go, it's okay. It's okay that I wasn't able to accomplish this, or I didn't do that, or haven't done that. I'm okay right where I am. And then that feeling kind of empowers you to go forward. I feel like we were talking before about confidence, how important confidence is. I think for me, as an artist, as an actor, as a boxer, confidence is huge. And I think, again, that's where the science comes in. It's the empirical data to give us the confidence to know that we're doing the right thing.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Liev and Jonathan for that closer. What a great way to end on our main stage today, on the green stage.
But our day isn't,
Sorry. Once again, I would like to take a moment to thank our title sponsor, Amazon, our official airline, Alaska Airlines, our supporting sponsor, Providence, and our contributing sponsor, Weyerhaeuser.
But our day isn't over yet. Please join us over in the Nesum Hall for this evening's Ideas Stage program, which will begin shortly. And in just a few minutes, we will host a performance from Tang and the Bangas on our outdoor stage.
And then at 5:30, we'll be hosting breakouts on our climate careers and on crisis collaboration. And then make sure to also be back here at 7 o'clock, where we will have our TED Countdown at the Bloomberg Green Festival.
And looking ahead to tomorrow, we have even more performances lined up in the climate creative space. We have the Bloomberg Green Docs Film Festival, where we will also be unveiling the winner of this year's competition. And of course, we have the Bloomberg Square Mile Relay.
And then, there's more. On Saturday, we also have some excursions available. There's a volunteer activity that you can do in Seattle, and there's also a family fun run. So please make sure that you check out the website for more details.
And lastly, we would love to get feedback from you on our inaugural Bloomberg Green Festival. If you'd like to share thoughts and your experience, please scan the QR code and fill out our survey. So please enjoy the rest of the festival and our programming. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.